Chapter 1072. It snowed a lot that winter. The heaviest snowfall did not fall on the wilderness, nor did it fall on capital Chung of the Yin Kingdom. Instead, it fell on the capital of the Kingdom of Song, which used to be relatively warm. Many people recalled it, and felt that it was some kind of omen, because something very important had happened in that snowfall. In the wind and snow, Yi Su, the founder of the new stream, was burned to death by Taoism, which shocked the entire human world. During this process, there were many puzzling things, such as why the Abbey Dean made such a cold and decisive decision, and why the Academy behaved sluggishly, which was completely different from before. The fourth brother came to the Song Kingdom with the river and mountain sandbox, and caught up with the battle. In fact, it was because of him that Chen Pipi, Tang Xiaodang, and several disciples of the Sword Garret had the chance to escape. But he could not change the whole situation. He did not save Yi Su. More importantly, he came by himself. The eldest brother also came to the Kingdom of Song, and was severely injured by the drunkard. But he came too late. It was snowing and the pile of firewood was already covered with snow. Not even ashes could be seen. How could he save Yi Su? More importantly, he came by himself, and did not represent the collective will of the Academy. The eldest brother and the fourth brother were acting on their own. They could represent the Academy, but not completely, because it was Yu Lian and Ning Ke who were in charge of the planning of the Academy. The Academy did not have any plan. What were Yu Lian and Ning Ke thinking? Was it really as Long Qing said before Yi Su died, that they were coldly waiting for Yi Su to die? The cold winter wind passed through the steep mountains. Heilin City, which had been retreating for a long time, was very quiet. The camp that used to house tens of thousands of cavalrymen was already empty. The sound of the goshawk sounded very monotonous. There were still hundreds of Tang soldiers in Heilin City, the only passageway between the eastern and western wastelands. They had been guarding this place for several years. If the Tang Empire had not prepared a large amount of provisions here, and the desolate man had secretly supported them, they would not have been able to hold on until now. At the highest point of the city gate, there was a very tall and domineering figure. The goshawk flew over from the distant ice peak, and wanted to take a closer look. It found that the figure was a bit strange, and the proportions were not harmonious. When the goshawk flew closer, it realized that the figure was weird, not because the person was born with something special, but because there were two of them, so they naturally looked weird. Tang looked at the Golden Tribe Royal Court in the west from the city gate, with an indifferent expression on his face. His animal skin clothes were fluttering in the cold wind, looking like a bloody flag that would not fall. He was the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, and the most powerful man in the Desolate Man's tribe. After Xiaoho's death, there were not many people who could be his opponent. But now someone was sitting on his head. To be more precise, he had a specially made basket on his shoulder. There was a stool in the basket, and someone was sitting on the stool. Because Dun was very tall, the person looked high and mighty. Sitting on his head was a young girl. She looked like she was about 12 or 13 years old. Her black ponytail swayed in the cold wind outside the basket, looking very cute. A few years ago in Chang, and the girl jumped into the sky and cut a rainbow. Then she jumped down with Li Man Man in her arms and broke her legs. Since then, she was too lazy to walk. At the beginning, she only liked to sit in a wheelchair. When she came to the wilderness, she began to sit on Tang's back. Even now, her injuries were basically healed. She still refused to get off. She said that it made her look more powerful. Since the day she became a little girl many years ago, her biggest regret was not the trouble every month, but not being powerful enough. Tang did not have any opinion on the girl's special preference, because she was the current grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, and also the Academy's third sister, Yu Lian, and his teacher. Just like in the past few years, Tang carried Yu Lian everywhere in the wilderness. Today, she came to Heilin City, because she wanted to see what the Golden Palace was doing in Heilin City. The priests in the Left King's Palace of the East Wilderness, as well as the powerhouses sent by the Divine Hall, were all killed by her and Tang in the past few years. Long Qing's loyal subordinates were the first to die. It sounded simple, but it was extremely terrifying when one thought about it carefully. She and Tang were only two people, but they were about to destroy a tribe. The population of the territory ruled by the tribe was actually no different from that of a country. There were tens of thousands of elite cavalries, endless support from Haotian Taoism, and countless powerhouses in the see-through state and knowing destiny state. But they destroyed it just like that. When Ning Ke was fleeing with Sang Sang on his back, he always had the feeling of fighting against the whole world alone. But what Yu Lian and Tang did was really the two of them destroying a world. After a few days, when she killed the last powerhouses in the East Wilderness, the warriors of the Desolate Man's tribe would collectively go south. Whether the more than 1,000 papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace stationed in the Yin Kingdom would go north or not, the name of the left king's palace would not exist in the human world for long. In the future, they could only look for it in the pile of old books. Yu Lian was very confident about this. She thought it was a matter of course, and she did not even bother to show her confidence. But she knew that the Golden Tribe Royal Court would not let this happen. So what would Chanyu do? What kind of gift did the National Master and the 13th priest prepare for her? The snow in the wilderness had stopped last night. The snow in the city of Wei and the city of Helan had also stopped. The air that had been washed by the snow for several days was unusually clean. She stood up and looked to the far west. The gate of Helan City was extremely high, between two cliffs. Tang was very tall, and she stood up in the basket, so she was naturally taller. But she was still not satisfied. She stood on her tiptoes on the stool, which looked interesting. I don't want to wait anymore. I feel something is happening over there. The wind blew her hair on her young face. It was a little itchy and irritating. She wiped it with her little palm and shouted, I want to go and have a look. She moved in the basket, and Tang's body was a little unstable. He held the bottom of the basket and said, The Golden Palace can't pass through Helan City. If we want to keep the last hope of the left king's palace, we have to use other methods. Yu Lian thought of a possibility, and then realized that it was not a possibility, but something that would definitely happen. She said, They are going south. Inform the tribe that we are going south too. When she said this, there was no emotion in her voice. It was just that the little girl's voice was immature, so it sounded like a little girl trying to have a serious conversation like an adult. It was very funny. Tang was used to this voice over the years, but his iron-like eyebrows still trembled uncontrollably. He said, The Golden Palace will be prepared. Maybe we should prepare for it too. As I said, I'm curious about the gift they prepared for me. Yu Lian said expressionlessly. I heard that the little slave is a gift from Sang Sang to the human world. I'm Ning Ke's senior sister. I'll open it for him. If I'm not satisfied, I'll return it. Shouldn't we worry about the Central Plains? Tang thought of the world wayfarer of Taoism, who used to be as famous as himself. He felt uneasy. The Abbey Dean is not an idiot like Xiong Chumao. Killing Yi Su is meaningless to Taoism. Why would he do it? The best and only way for Taoism to deal with it is to wait. Yu Lian said, If the battle between Haotian and the headmaster in the Divine Kingdom is decided before the new stream affects the foundation of Haotian's faith, they will win by waiting or gambling. The new stream was a faith. With the protection of the Academy and the Tang Empire, it would be difficult to completely destroy the faith. The more pressure Taoism exerted on the new stream, the more likely it would help the new stream to grow. If the Academy wanted to take the lead in this war, it had to help the new stream to grow and weaken the power of Haotian before the battle in the Divine Kingdom was decided. Relatively speaking, Taoism seemed to be in a good situation. But in fact they were in a passive position. It was wrong to do it or not. As Yu Lian said, they could only wait calmly or helplessly. The Academy had the initiative. That was why Ning Ke wanted to talk to the world. He was qualified to do so. He was confident that he could persuade Taoism and the Abbey Dean. Yu Lian had the same idea. At this moment the Tang army stationed in Helan City brought a message. The Tang Empire had spent a lot of resources to build a transmission array in Helan City. It could only transmit simple messages and would not be activated easily. It had only been activated a few times in the past decades. The last time was the news of the late emperor's death. Today, the transmission array was activated again. It was also a piece of bad news that Yu Lian did not expect. Yi Su is dead. Upon receiving the news, Tang recalled the scenes in the past 20 years. He thought of the tree in the wilderness, and the proud young man with a sword on his back, who said the devil was an outsider. He kept silent for a long time. Yu Lian also kept silent for a long time. The long time here was really long. She had been silent in the cold wind since she received the news of Yi Su's death. She did not stop until the sun moved to the west and dusk covered the entire western horizon. White smoke came from somewhere in Helan City. She looked at the smoke and said, "Bad news can also be good news." For a few hours, she did not sigh or feel sad. She was reflecting and calculating in silence. She was calculating how Yi Su's death would affect the situation in the world. In the end, the result of her calculation was that the impact should be on the side that the Academy hoped for. That was why she said that Yi Su's death could also be good news. Just like the smoke rising from the chimney, it looked lonely, but in fact, it was the smell of fireworks that people needed to live. Yu Lian was very cold. Yes, she was a cold person. That was why Long Qing said that she and Ning Ke had been waiting for Yi Su to die. That was not her plan. But since Yi Su was dead, she could accept it. It was not the most important thing. She kept silent in the cold wind for a long time, from noon to dusk. Besides thinking about the turmoil caused by Yi Su's death, she also wanted to understand the most important thing. What was the Abbey Dean thinking? She told Tang that she and Ning Ke were sure that the Abbey Dean would not do anything to Yi Su. It turned out that she and Ning Ke were wrong. There must be a big problem hidden in this mistake. I will not feel comfortable if I don't figure out what he is thinking. Yu Lian walked down the city, leaving the dusk behind. At the same time, she also left the Golden Tribe Royal Court behind. Compared to what she was worried about, those things were not worth mentioning at all. At the other end of the transmission array in Helan City was the Tang Imperial Palace. Yu Lian received the news of Yi Su's death in Helan City, so the people in the palace naturally knew about it earlier. The atmosphere was extremely depressing. Li Yu's face was a little pale. She did not know whether it was because of the lack of sunshine in recent years or some other reason. She looked calm, but her hands clenched on the chair, looking a little uneasy. In fact, not only was she uneasy, she was also very nervous and even afraid. But she was the regent princess, and she had to set an example for the emperor, so she could not show too many emotions. The young emperor was getting older, and would officially ascend the throne next year. He had been educated by Mr. First, and he had performed extremely well both in virtue and ability. But he was still a young man, and today he encountered a situation that he had never encountered before. Thinking of the war years ago, he could not help but feel a little scared. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, stood in front of the steps and said, "As the emperor, even if the world changes, mountains are destroyed, and rivers are broken, he must remain calm. This is the example that the emperor should set for his subjects." The young emperor looked at Li Yu nervously and said, "I understand, but I am a little worried about whether 13th uncle can stop that person." Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, shouted sternly, "So what if he can't stop him? It's not like that person has never entered Chang'an." Old Lady Chu pushed her family's women and children to the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and Old Master Chow and his friends cursed him in the cold snow. The people of Chang'an threw bricks and waved their knives. Was there anyone who was afraid? Li Yu walked to the emperor's side, held his hand, and said gently, "Are you still afraid?" The young emperor's cheeks flushed upon hearing Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary's words, and his courage increased. He held her hand and said, "No, even if that person enters the imperial palace, I am not afraid." The officials in the hall were very nervous, and security was tight everywhere, but the palace gate was not closed. The main gate of the Tang Imperial Palace was wide open, as if it was ready to welcome guests from afar. All the civil and military officials in the court, and even the ordinary people in Chang'an, were preparing for battle. It was not because of Yi Su's death, but because of something else. From last night to this morning, the iron arrow had not appeared in the capital of the Kingdom of Song. There were only yellow sand and falling snowflakes on the square, but no shrill whistling of the arrow. Where was Ning Ke? What was he doing? The legendary primordial 13 arrows required a lot of strict conditions to perform a long-range sniping that ignored distance. However, those conditions had actually been fulfilled during this period of time. Whether it was the Sha hand scroll of the tomes of arcane in Long Qing's hands, the power of faith borrowed by Yi Su, or the river and mountain sandbox brought by fourth brother, they had all illuminated the chi of heaven and earth and pointed the direction for the iron arrow. At the moment when Tang Xiaotang jumped down from the sky, Long Qing was as bright as a golden flower in the ocean of consciousness, just like he had been many years ago on the snow cliff of Tianqi Mountain. At that time, he shot Long Qing to death with one arrow, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Why didn't he shoot him today? Was it really as Long Qing said, that he was waiting for Yi Su to die, so he didn't shoot? It had been snowing in Chang'an for several days, and it did not stop last night. The snowflakes drifted down and piled up on the city wall, on people's clothes and even on their faces. Ning Kei's eyebrows were stained with snow and turned white, because his body was very cold. And the reason why his body was cold was because his heart was cold, because he had placed all his attention elsewhere. He held the dark iron bow tightly in his left hand, and the bow was bent to the extreme, like the bright moon in the night. The bowstring was extremely tight, and it went deep into the 3 fingers of his right hand, which looked a little scary. He kept the posture of drawing the bow, and it had not changed from last night to this morning. He was like an ignorant statue, and maybe because of this, the snow between his eyebrows had piled up. Some snow fell on his shoulders, and it was melted by his body temperature, and then frozen again by the cold wind. It reflected the morning light from the east, and sparkled like melted sand, a beautiful colored glass. The iron bow did not move at all after one night. He saw the unusually bright West Hill Divine Palace last night. This morning, the eastern seashore became extremely bright. Then, he saw 2 flowing lights between heaven and earth. They were the eldest brother and the drunkard. He had been observing the world in Chang'an. He did not step out of the city, but he knew what was going on in the world. He knew that from last night to this morning, many powerful cultivators were fighting fiercely, but he did not release the bowstring. He did not shoot the arrow, not because he was hesitating whether to save Yi Su. He was cold, but not like Lotus. He could watch Yi Su die, but he would not watch Yi Su be killed. The morning light shone on his face. He sensed that something was happening at the East Sea, something he did not want to see, but he could not release the bowstring and shoot the iron arrow. His black hair was tightly tied, and it was steaming in the cold morning wind. It was the sweat in his hair. He held the iron bow and looked at the arrow. The sweat overflowed from his hair to his face, and melted the snow between his eyebrows. The iron arrow did not leave the bowstring, because there was someone in front of it. From last night to this morning, he had been aiming at that person. He could not pay attention to what was happening elsewhere. For Ning Kei, that person was the most terrifying opponent, and also the sweetest bait. Because of fear, he had to aim at him. Because he wanted to shoot the enemy, he had to aim at him. In front of the city wall of Chang'an, there was a Taoist in indigo. In the snow, there was a Taoist in indigo. Ning Kei's iron arrow had been aiming at him since last night. The Taoist in indigo put his hands behind his back and looked calm, as if he did not care about being aimed at by the iron arrow. The primordial 13 arrows were legendary killing weapons. The proud young powerful man of the barbarian tribe, Ade, did not dare to move, and the drunkard was scared out of cold sweat. But the Taoist in indigo did not care at all. In the wind and snow, his indigo robe fluttered, fluttering like an immortal, just like in the past. Back then, he fought in Chang'an alone. Today, he left Peach Mountain and came to Chang'an again. He stayed in the wind and snow in front of the city for a night. Ning Kei pulled the bow all night. The night passed, and the morning came. The torches on the city wall were extinguished one by one, but he was still bright. He was like a torch, attracting Ning Kei's sight, locking his iron arrow in spirit. Even if Ning Kei could see the whole world, he could not do anything, because he was the most powerful person in Taoism, the most powerful person in Taoism for thousands of years. Chapter 1073. The whole night of confrontation had undoubtedly brought great stress to Ning Quebec. His clothes had been soaked, frozen by the cold wind, and soaked again by his sweat. It had repeated countless times. The Abbey Dean had left Peach Mountain and suddenly appeared in front of Chang'an. It was shocking, but what scared Ning Ke the most was that his ocean of qi and mountain of snow had been destroyed. How could he recover? Yes, although the iron arrow had not been shot, and they had not fought, Ning Ke knew that the Abbey Dean had recovered. It was an unquestionable feeling. The Abbey Dean had completely integrated with heaven and earth. Ning Ke felt that he would lose the Abbey Dean's position if he blinked. It was like the knowing destiny state, but more wonderful. After a night of confrontation, Ning Ke had enough time to think. He thought a lot, but he could not get any answers. He could not understand what had happened to the Abbey Dean, so he could only focus on other things. He tried to figure out what was happening in the Peach Mountain and the Kingdom of Song through the Abbey Dean's arrival. Obviously, the peace talk had failed. Did the Abbey Dean really want to kill Yisu? What about Yi Hongyu? Was he not worried about the division of Taoism? Was he so confident that he could defeat the academy? Ning Ke wanted to see the division of Taoism, so he asked Chu Yuxian and Chen Qi to bring those words to Yi Hongyu. But he did not want to see the current situation, because everything was out of his calculation, which made him very uneasy. The city gate was closed. The wind and snow were everywhere. The Tang army guarding the city had withdrawn. All of a sudden, the Abbey Dean looked toward the east. Ning Ke glanced at the east with his peripheral vision. The Abbey Dean had not spoken since last night. But he suddenly said calmly, "You said you wanted to talk to the world. I want to talk to you too." Ning Ke wanted to talk to the world. In a sense, he wanted to talk to the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean wanted to talk to him, but he wanted to talk to the whole world. The Abbey Dean pushed the wheelchair down the cliff and floated down Peach Mountain, which proved that his ocean of qi and mountain of snow were recovering. He would be as invincible as before. This was a very important moment. At this moment, the first sentence he said to the world was simple, but it was like a thunderclap. He turned his eyes from the east and looked at Ning Ke on the city wall. "Yisu is dead. Yisu is dead. Or I killed Yisu." Ning Ke was silent. He was neither angry nor sad, nor did he ask for details. Just a moment ago, he had also felt the strange changes between heaven and earth by the eastern seashore. He had vaguely heard something. His silence didn't last for too long. He sighed, and then he smiled. His smile was a bit bitter, because right now, his mind was a bit blank, and he didn't know what to do. Then is Yi Hongyu also dead? He was not asking the Abbey Dean. It was more like he was asking himself with a strong negative attitude. But he knew that Haotian Taoism would definitely kill Yi Hongyu before killing Yisu. One was the founder of the new stream, and the other was the great divine priest of judgment of the West Hill Divine Palace. Yisu and Yi Hongyu were the two people who could change the course of history, and they were also the hope of the academy. Now that his hope had become an illusory bubble, how could he not be silent? Just as Yu Lian had predicted, he also believed that Yisu's death might not be a great loss to the spread of the new stream, the academy, and the Tang Empire. It might even bring some benefits. But he also knew that many things could not be calculated so objectively and calmly. The academy had always understood this. If Yi Hongyu was really dead, the Abbey Dean looked at him on top of the city wall quietly and said nothing. A night had passed. The bowstring had penetrated his flesh, and 3 fingers of Ning Ke's right hand began to bleed. The blood dyed the bowstring red, and it dripped down like rainwater from the eaves, down the city wall, and onto the snow. There were many reasons why he didn't shoot the Abbey Dean. The most important reason was that he wanted to hold on to his hope. He didn't have the confidence to shoot the Abbey Dean with the primordial 13 arrows, so he couldn't shoot. Things that didn't happen could have many endings. But when the endings were destined, there could only be one and only one gloomy conclusion. Just like the death of Yisu and Yi Hongyu. But how long would this standoff last? Was he going to pull the iron bow and shoot the indigo robe until the seas ran dry and the rocks crumbled? How long would the Abbey Dean stand in the snow? Did he want to block the entire Chang'an city by himself? What else did he want to do other than kill Yisu? Ning Ke couldn't figure it out. He only knew that if this continued, his will would be destroyed by the Abbey Dean. Even if the Abbey Dean did nothing but stand there quietly. Maybe destroying his will was also something the Abbey Dean wanted to do? When the news of Yi Su's death came, the most critical moment had passed. Ning Ke made an action that even he didn't expect to make just a moment ago. He withdrew the arrow and put away the bow. With this action, the ice on his shoulder broke into pieces, and the snow on his clothes fell down. The Abbey Dean's eyes showed appreciation, but Ning Ke's expression was indifferent. He was also indifferent to himself. Yi Su was dead, and the Abbey Dean's most important goal was achieved. He had suffered a crushing defeat. If this standoff or battle had to continue, he could only use this method to force himself and Chang and into a desperate situation, and to seek survival in a desperate situation. He carried the iron bow on his shoulder. The gate of Chang'an City was unguarded. Please come in. If the Abbey Dean wanted more, Chang'an would welcome him. Ning Ke didn't think the Abbey Dean would take this risk after Yi Su's death. A few years ago in Chang'an, he used thousands of knives to kill the Abbey Dean. Now he could do the same. He didn't regret not shooting the East Sea last night or before, because the Abbey Dean was always there, and he couldn't be distracted. But now he didn't need to be distracted. The Abbey Dean looked at the city wall, smiled, and turned to leave. Ning Ke looked at his back and said, "I will figure out what you want to do." The Abbey Dean didn't look back, and said, "When you figure it out, you will come to me." He was gone, but the wind and snow were still there. Ning Ke didn't sit on the city wall anymore, because he needed to figure something out. Taoism's unexpected decisiveness confused him, but he didn't feel frustrated. History always went up in a spiral, and wars rarely won all the way to the end. He walked down the city wall, and silently walked in the streets of Chang'an. He went to the Wanyan Tower to look at the statues of the venerables. He went to the Southern Gate Temple and meditated in the Taoist temple with the black floor. He didn't go to Lin 40th Street, but to Yanming Lake. He sat on the shore and looked at the lotus leaves in the lake, which were like statues without warmth, gradually covered by the white snow. Years ago in the Wanyan Tower, he understood the talisman. In the Southern Gate Temple, he understood Taoism. In the Yanming Lake, he understood more principles, including life and death, and something beyond life and death. But now he couldn't figure out what the Abbey Dean wanted to do. The Abbey Dean was the most powerful person in Taoism, and the Academy's biggest enemy. Even the headmaster of the Academy couldn't erase him from the world. He was also Chen Pippi's father and Yi Su's teacher. Logically speaking, the Academy should know him well. But it was not until this moment that he realized he was unfamiliar with this person. He couldn't even give a relatively truthful description of this person. He knew that the Abbey Dean's name was Chen Mao, and he was a rare cultivation genius. But he didn't know his preferences, or his views on the world, or his spiritual orientation. Did he want to become a god or a saint, or to be quiet and do nothing? He sat on the shore of Yanming Lake for 3 days and 3 nights, but still couldn't figure it out. He didn't even have a clue. So he got up and left, and the place where he sat was quickly covered by snow. The headmaster Yin Sei turned into ashes, and was buried in a wild grave in the suburbs. The eldest brother hadn't come back yet, and he should be looking for Chen Pippi and the others. The second brother was still fighting with the Buddhism sect in the west. The third sister was killing people in the wilderness, and Chao Xiaoshu was waiting for the last moment in the small town. He walked in Chang'an, but he couldn't find anyone, someone who could guide him. Finally, he walked in front of a brothel, which was the House of Red Sleeves. In this brothel, he once wrote a very famous calligraphy and had many experiences. And in this brothel, there was his real elder, Mistress Jian. Walking to the top floor of the House of Red Sleeves, he bowed to Mistress Jian and said, "Aunt Jian, I have something to ask you." Mistress Jian looked at his tired face and suddenly said, "I want to go to the academy." Since the spring wind and rain, Ning Ke had been sitting in Chang'an and never left the city gate. The academy was in the south of Chang'an, and he had to leave the city if he wanted to go there. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Okay." The carriage left the House of Red Sleeves, passed the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and went out of the city to the south. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the academy. They ran over the meadow, passed by the cold-resistant plum bushes and withered peach trees, and entered the back of the mountain. Walking in the back of the mountain, Mistress Jian looked at the warm cliff platform, the faintly visible small courtyard in the forest, and listened to the sound of the waterfall. Her expression was a bit complicated, and she didn't say anything. Bypassing the waterfall, passing through the narrow stone wall, they came to the precipice of the back of the mountain and climbed up the steep mountain path with difficulty. Finally, they came under the wisteria and came to the cliff cave. The wisteria was planted by Sangsang, and the small building was built by his senior brothers and sisters. Ning Ke stood under the wisteria, looking at the long beans that had long been dried by the wind, and felt a bit lost. Mistress Jian walked to the cliff cave and looked into the dark cave with the help of the sunlight. When she saw the few words written on the stone wall, her expression changed slightly, and her eyes became slightly moist. She seemed to be a bit moved. Those were the words written by Kaharan himself. "This is the first time for me to enter the back of the mountain of the academy." Mistress Jian turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff. She put her hands behind her back and looked at Chang and city in the distance under the setting sun. Looking at the white clouds, she said, "I thought I would never come here." Those stories were the stories of the elders, so Ning Ke didn't ask, so he just kept silent. Mistress Jian said, "Actually, I have never liked the headmaster of the academy." Ning Ke didn't understand. He always thought that people like the headmaster could easily win the respect and love of everyone. Why did Mistress Jian say that she didn't like him? Mistress Jian looked back at him and said, "Because your uncle was taught by him." Yes, although the headmaster of the academy and Koharan called each other senior brother. That was because Koharan was too proud. In fact, he was taught by the headmaster of the academy, and at least his view of the world was greatly influenced by the headmaster of the academy. Ning Ke vaguely understood what Mistress Jian meant. If not for the headmaster of the academy, why would your uncle be so interested in the sky? Mistress Jian looked at the sky and said, "The academy always says that it looks after the human world. But in fact, when did you really look at the human world? You always look at the sky, and always think that one day you will defeat and break the sky. But when did the sky ever offend you?" What she said was very unreasonable, especially when she said it in front of this cliff cave. Back then, when Koharan tempered himself in the cliff cave, the headmaster of the academy ate meat and drank wine by the cliff and scolded the sky. Until later, whether the academy's view of the world was correct or not, it could not be the concept of a fight between hooligans. He rode a black donkey and held a sword upside down. Lotus was not as good as him, and the Abbey Dean was not as good as him. He was invincible in the world. As long as he didn't get tired of living, he could live for another few thousand years. Then why did he die? Mistress Jian said, "Because he was so arrogant that he wanted to go against heaven. So he was killed by Haotian." Why did he want to go against heaven? Because he wanted freedom. Why did he want freedom? It was all because of the headmaster of the academy's influence. If not for the headmaster of the academy, would he have died so early? So it was all the headmaster of the academy's fault. Deducing from the conclusion, and ignoring Koharan's own thoughts and choices in the process, it was even more unreasonable to blame the headmaster of the academy for everything. In order to figure out the Abbey Dean's true thoughts, Ning Ke walked around Chang and city and pondered hard by the Yinming Lake. He was exhausted both mentally and physically. Finally, he found his only elder, but he did not expect to hear such unreasonable and irrelevant words. He could not help but sigh that women were indeed unreasonable. After saying this, Mistress Jian directly left the cliff platform and walked down the cliff along the mountain path. She did not say anything and did not pay attention to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke was speechless and could not understand what was going on. Suddenly, he vaguely understood something. Yes, what Mistress Jian said was completely unreasonable. Her words and actions were completely unreasonable. There was only hatred, just like the 2 times when Sangsang ran away from home and left the human world. From his point of view, it was also unreasonable. This kind of unreasonable, in fact, was also a kind of reason. This was Mistress Jane's way of telling him that when he did not understand something, he might as well ignore it and deduce it from the result without reason. Sang Sang abandoned 20 years of love and thousands of years of companionship in the chessboard. She left him in the human world and mercilessly returned to the divine kingdom. This showed that she was still Haotian. No one could understand why the Abidine killed Yisu. So instead of thinking about the reason, they just looked at the result. Taoism would be seriously weakened, but the new stream would not be suppressed. This was the biggest puzzle for the academy. But according to Mistress Jian's thinking, it was some kind of proof. The final result was that the foundation of Taoism would be shaken and Haotian would be weakened. This was the result. Ignoring the connection between cause and effect, not thinking about the process between the beginning and the end, and not guessing the Abidine's intention, one could get close to the truth, as long as one stared at the result. The Abidine hoped that Haotian would be weakened. This was too absurd, too illogical. It was as unreasonable as what Mistress Jian said. But Ning Ke knew it was true. He looked up at the distant sky and remained silent. Heavens, I'm just forgetting about the heavens. Everyone says that I've forgotten about Sang Sang. I love her so much, how could I forget about her? It's just that she's so high and mighty. So how can I easily make an appearance? Writing a novel is indeed not an easy job. I've been working hard. I hope that I can make everyone happy, and I hope that I can keep writing happily. Shake hands, my dears. Let's have a good time together. Chapter 1074. So that's how it is. Then what does it mean? Although he did not get the final answer, Ning Ke was one step closer to the truth, and to the Abidine's idea. Maybe it was just a small step, but it was a big gain. Because according to the usual way of thinking, neither he, eldest brother, nor Yu Lian could come to this conclusion. In other words, no one dared to. Haotian Taoism wanted to weaken Haotian, and even destroy it. It was not as simple as deceiving the master and destroying the ancestors. It was fundamentally against faith and logic. No one would think like that. Mistress Jian did not know what the Abidine was thinking, but she could understand Ning Ke's confusion and pain. So she used two unreasonable words to point out the way for him. She used Kaharan's sword, the most direct way. People always said that the destination was not important, but the scenery along the way. Most of the time, it was just a self-comfort of the loser, and an excuse for not having the courage to move forward. Looking back at the destination, the scenery along the way was actually more beautiful and clearer. It was the same with life, and also with thinking. Ning Ke looked back at the mountain path, and her figure between the cliffs. He knew that if she went to cultivate, she would definitely become a top figure. She was just not interested in it. He was grateful for her advice, just like what she had done in the past. She had been taking care of him since he came to Chang'an from the city of Wei. When he first entered the House of Red Sleeves, she started to teach him, because he reminded her of the lad who rode the little black donkey. Thinking of the first time they met years ago, the ridiculous days in the House of Red Sleeves, the fact that Mistress Jian made all the brothels in the Tang afraid to do business with him, the unspoken criticism, and the gratitude he felt now, he could not help but sigh for a long time. His face was full of self-mockery and emotion. The Abidine wanted Haotian to weaken. This was what Ning Ke was sure of. As for the reason, he had a vague guess, but he could not grasp the most crucial light. Or maybe it had been bright before, but he could not believe it. Even if the sun went out, life had to go on. Without understanding the Abidine's intention, the situation in the world could not be changed. The war between the Tang Empire and the human world officially started again. Chang'an was filled with tension and killing. All the prefectures and prefectures were constantly sending supplies to the border. The military ministry was brightly lit throughout the night, constantly mobilizing troops. The world outside of the Tang Empire was also in chaos. The news of Yisu's death had brought the new stream to a low ebb. However, according to the intelligence of the secret guards, there was no large-scale withdrawal of the new stream. It was believed that after some time, the new stream would become even more powerful. Since the war had already begun, it had to be won. This was the principle that Ning Ke had always followed, and it was also the principle that the Great Tang followed. But to actually carry it out was assuredly very difficult. The most elite Yulin royal guards in the capital region had been transferred to the Verdant Canyon, ready to go south to Qinghe Prefecture at any time. On the surface, it seemed that Chang'an did not need to worry about defense with Ning Ke around. However, it also showed that the Tang Empire was under great pressure. Even the Yulin royal guards had to enter the battlefield and prepare for field battles. Ning Ke stood on the city wall, looking at the falling snow and the advancing Tang army in the wind and snow. He thought that since the war had begun, it seemed to be someone's principle to win. Was Yi Hongyu really dead? According to the Abbey Dean's style and wisdom, if Yi Su was going to die, she would die at the same time. He would not leave her any chance of survival. And according to what he had sensed that night, she was indeed dead. The Taoist of the Jishou Abbey, the hierarch of the Divine Halls, Xiong Chumo, and Zhao Nanhai of the South Sea. Facing such a lineup, Ning Ke was not confident that he could escape, and neither could she. But for some reason, he felt that Yi Hongyu was not dead. A woman like her should not have died so quietly. He had an unreasonable confidence in her. It was dead silent in the divine halls of West Hill. Countless divine priests and deacons knelt before the stone steps. They looked pale and terrified, because the thunder was roaring above their heads. The light screen made of thousands of rays of light was trembling under the thunder, as if it would fall at any time. The tall figure behind the light screen was trembling. Was it because of anger or fear? Yi Hongyu jumped into the abyss. The hierarch and Zhao Nanhai were sure that she was dead, but they did not relax. They sent many people down to the abyss to look for her body. The abyss under the precipice was extremely dangerous. The one in charge of this mission was a powerful cultivator in the knowing destiny state from the South Sea, and many other powerful cultivators from Taoism. Even so, it took them more than 10 days to return to Peach Mountain. By the time they came back, less than 1/5 of them were still alive. Most importantly, they did not bring back the body that the hierarch wanted to see the most. All they could bring back was bad news. The hierarch's angry voice exploded in the Taoist hall like thunder. Those kneeling before the stone steps were terrified. They did not know what kind of punishment they would face, so no one dared to speak. After a long time, the hierarch finally calmed down. His voice also became much softer. Only his closest subordinates could hear the uneasiness in his voice. Find her and kill her at all costs. The divine halls of West Hill did not find Yi Hongyu's body at the bottom of the abyss, but they found several ruts and traces of people passing by, which proved a shocking fact. Yi Hongyu was still alive. She jumped from the railing to the precipice and fell into the clouds. When everyone thought she was dead, she was still alive. She did what only Haoyan could do. How did she do it? If we were to start from the beginning, we would have to go back to half a year ago. At that time, a letter left the Divine Hall of Judgment and was sent to a place through the most secret way. It was an invitation. To put it simply, we could turn the picture to that night. It was the night when the hierarch Xiong Chumo, the middle-aged priest, and Zhao Nanhai besieged Yi Hongyu. During the day before that night, Chu Yuxian and Chunqi had a passionate conversation in the Taoist hall. They invited Yi Hongyu on behalf of Ning Ke, and expressed the contempt of the academy and the Tang Empire to the entire divine halls of West Hill. Because of Yi Su and the prediction of the Abbey Dean, Yi Hongyu did not accept Ning Ke's rude invitation. But she did not ask the hierarch to kill them either. Instead, she locked them in the U prison. The U prison was a place used by the divine halls of West Hill to imprison the traitors and the remnants of the devil's doctrine. It was heavily guarded with countless tactical arrays waiting to kill. For countless years, no one had ever escaped from this prison except for Wei Guangming. Even Ning Ke could not do anything to Chen Pipi when he was imprisoned here. Chu Yuxian and Chunqi were taken to the deepest part of the U prison by the black-robed deacons of the judicial department. They were locked in a cramped cell behind the iron fence. At that time, they had no hope of leaving. They knew that they would either die or never see the light of day. Either outcome was hopeless. What comforted them was that no one came to interrogate them from day to night. The rumored horrible means of the judicial department did not fall on them. It was very simple for them to understand that they were not badly mutilated and did not want to commit suicide because of Yi Hongyu. Only she would do that. Tonight or tomorrow, she might coldly kill Chu Yuxian and Chunqi, but she would not torture them. That was already a great mercy for her. She did not accept Ning Kei's invitation. It seemed that she did not want to make Ning Kei angry. Chu Yuxian and Chunqi sat in the cell and looked at the stone wall in silence. There was nothing in the cell except a bucket of water. No one brought them food. They were not tortured or subjected to the horrible punishments of the judicial department. But no one cared about them. The long wait was actually a cruel torture. They did not know when someone would come in and kill them. The psychological anxiety made Chu Yuxian a little uneasy, and his face became paler and paler. Chun Qi's thoughts were much deeper than his. He was wondering if Yi Hongyu was waiting for them to kill themselves by hitting the wall when no one was paying attention to them. A quiet environment always made people think too much, especially for Chun Qi, who was good at scheming. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was true. Yi Hongyu's mercy should be to give them a chance to kill themselves. He told Chu Yuxian, who became paler. After a moment of hesitation, he asked what they should do next. Should they kill themselves by hitting the wall, or wait for another night? Chunqi did not hear it. Just when Chu Yuxian asked, a horrible bang came from outside the cell, which completely covered Chu Yuxian's most courageous question in his life. Along with that terrifying sound, there was a tremor. The cells hidden deep in the mountain began to shake violently. The water in the bucket kept swaying and splashing out a lot. Chu Yuxian held the wall and struggled to stand still. He felt a little dizzy. Was it an earthquake? Chunqi's expression became serious. He quickly walked to the stone window and looked out of the cell. He could only see the bright moon in the night sky and nothing else. He clearly heard that the horrible crash came from the night sky outside the cliff, and the tremor should come from the top of Peach Mountain, which meant something happened there. Then, several more loud bangs came from the top of Peach Mountain. The tremor spread to the cell. More and more water splashed out of the bucket, wet the ground, and then flowed to Chu Yuxian. Chu Yuxian took 2 steps back and asked Chunqi with a pale face, "What happened?" Chunqi shook his head and said, "I don't know." They were prisoners now, so they did not know that several top powerhouses of Haotian Taoism were fighting in the Black Divine Hall of Judgment on the top of Peach Mountain. The horrible crash and tremor were the effects of the battle. Hearing footsteps, Chu Yuxian and Chunqi looked back and saw a deacon in black walking to the fence, took out a key and opened the fence. He signaled them to follow him out. The deacon in black was about 40 years old. His face was extremely pale, not because of illness or fear, but because he had not seen the sun for years. The deacon took out the key, opened the fence, and signaled the prisoners to follow him out. His pale face showed no expression, and he looked calm and natural. Chu Yuxian and Chunqi looked at each other and saw the confusion and anxiety in each other's eyes. The change happened suddenly, but they did not know whether it was good or bad. Would they be greeted by death, or something else after they left the stone room? After leaving the cell, they were greeted by a very long passage. The passage was made of stone walls, about 1.5 men tall, and no wider than 2 men. It extended diagonally from a warehouse at the back of the U prison to the bottom of Peach Mountain. The dim light cast their shadows on the dry ground. The sound of their footsteps was unusually clear. No one came out to stop them. The deacon in black walked in front of them expressionlessly, as if he was sure that the entire U prison had fallen asleep at this time. So it did not matter how loud his footsteps were. The passage was really long. Chu Yuxian and Chunqi walked in it for 4 hours. Their feet were sore, their eyes were dizzy, and their calves were about to cramp, but they still did not see the exit. Chunqi keenly noticed that the walls of this part of the passage were covered with light dust, and there were traces of wind blowing on them. The oil stains on the oil lamp were still fresh. Judging from the wind blowing, they were about to reach the bottom of the mountain, according to the slope of the passage and the distance they had walked. He relaxed a little because the passage was coming to an end, and then he became nervous again. All the details showed that no one had walked through this passage for at least decades. There was such an unknown escape passage hidden in the U prison of the Divine Halls of West Hill. Who built it? Where was the black-clothed deacon going to take them? Chunqi guessed the truth, but he was even more shocked and puzzled. As the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu naturally knew the biggest secret of the Yu prison, which even the hierarch did not know. She was the only one who could keep the entire Yu prison silent. But why did she secretly let him and Chu Yuxian go? Finally, they reached the end of the passage. The deacon in black pressed a black brick to deactivate the mechanism, took out his Taoist sword, and carefully pulled out several bushes with deadly thorns in front of them. Then he walked out with Chu Yuxian and Qinqi. Outside the cave there was freedom. Countless starlight fell from the night sky, filtered by the clouds between the cliffs and melted by the miasma at the bottom of the abyss, turning from milky white to a strange purple. Looking at the strange purple starlight, Qinqi and Chu Yuxian were equally excited about freedom and confused. For a moment, they were stunned and did not know what to say. The deacon did not give them a chance to speak. He turned over his palm and put 2 pills into their mouths. When Chu Yuxian realized what was going on, the pill had already entered his stomach and melted. He was shocked and angry, especially when he felt the malice and burning pain in his chest and abdomen. He thought he was poison, which made him even more indignant. If you want to kill me, you can just kill me in the cell. Why did you let me out of the cell and poison me after walking so far to the Yu prison? How painful it is to give people hope and then make them despair. Are all the people in the divine hall of judgment perverts? Don't you know that my feet are worn out after walking so far? Chu Yuxian collapsed on the ground in fear. He was a little confused, thinking about these messy things and helplessly waiting for death. But after waiting for a while, instead of sinking into the dark ocean and falling asleep, he became more and more awake. What's wrong? He stood up in confusion and shook his head. It took him a long time to fully wake up. When he saw the miasma under the starlight and remembered the information he read in Chang'an, he realized that the pill was not poison, but an antidote to the miasma. He could not help but feel embarrassed. He wiped the sweat on his forehead and the rotten leaves on his body. Then he walked to the deacon and Qinqi in front of him. When he was about to move forward, he found that the two did not mean to. Most of the trees at the bottom of the abyss were vines without large leaves, so it was not accurate to call it a forest. Normally the view should be relatively wide, but it was not. Most of the starlight in the night sky was covered by the clouds and mist between the cliffs, which was why it turned into that weird purple color. After they stood for a while, the miasma around them became thicker and thicker, and the environment became extremely dark. Chu Yuxian noticed that there were thick rotten leaves under his feet. Looking at the vague shadows of vines around him, he suddenly felt a little cold when he thought of the horror of the abyss behind the Yu prison. The miasma in the abyss contained natural toxins, as well as the resentful thoughts left by the dead prisoners in the Yu prison. It was terrible when mixed together, and he was standing in the miasma. Chu Yuxian knew that if he had not taken the antidote pill, he would have bled to death. He was still alive, but he was still very scared, especially when he heard the faint howling of animals behind the vines. His forehead, which had just been wiped dry, was covered with cold sweat. There was a miasma, and there were powerful creatures living in the miasma for countless years. It was said that no one had ever walked out of the abyss. Could they walk out? If they could not, wouldn't they still die? Chu Yuxian thought in fear. Looking at Qinqi and the deacon who were standing still, he did not understand why they did not continue to move forward. The wind blew down from the cliffs and thinned the miasma in the forest. When the starlight shone again, Chu Yuxian noticed that there was a pool nearby, and there were some vague shadows on the other side of the pool, which should be carriages. How could there be carriages in such a dangerous isolated area? Whose carriages were those? Who was in those carriages and waiting for who by the pool? Waiting for him? Then why didn't they go there? Chu Yuxian narrowly escaped death tonight and encountered the abyss of certain death. His spirit had been repeatedly shocked, and he had become a little confused. He kept thinking about these messy things. As the brain of the fish dragon gang, Qinqi was known for his coldness, so he was much calmer. He only glanced at the carriages for a few times, and then looked up at the night sky like the deacon beside him. Something should fall from the night sky. At this moment, Qinqi vaguely understood something. It seemed that the Academy's plan had succeeded. Yi Hongyu was really going to betray Taoism. But why did she choose to leave in the middle of the night and choose such a dangerous path? What puzzled him the most was whether Yi Hongyu would really jump down from the top of the Peach Mountain, break through the clouds, and fall directly here as the black-robed deacon hinted. The top of the Peach Mountain was as high as the sky. There were countless dangers between the cliffs and the miasma at the bottom of the abyss. No matter who jumped down, they would definitely die. Sang Sang didn't die because she was Haotian. Ning Ke didn't die because Sang Sang jumped down with him and hugged him tightly in her arms when they landed. No one came to hold Yi Hongyu, and Sang Sang had already returned to the divine kingdom. Then how could she survive? She could not survive. Qinshi thought desperately. The hierarch Xiong Chumo, the middle-aged priest, and Zhao Nanhai all thought the same. Even the abbey dean had the same thought. Between the cliffs at the back of Peach Mountain, there were two startling grand formations. In the clouds and mist, there were many ancient inhibitions. Those were the wisdom accumulated by Taoism over countless years. They were not managed by the divine hall of judgment, but operated on their own, as if they were alive. They grew stronger and stronger with the help of nature. Apart from the difference between the top of the mountain and the bottom of the abyss, the most dangerous part of the road in the night sky was not the poison in the miasma, but the array that represented the wisdom of Taoism. Even if Master Yen Sei came back to life, he could not break it in a short time, not to mention in the moment of falling. Who could do it? However, there was a sound of breaking through the air between the cliffs. Someone had really jumped down from the top of the mountain. Qinshi became extremely nervous. He was not Ning Ke, so he could not have such blind confidence in Yi Hongyu. He always felt that he would see Yi Hongyu die in the next moment. Yes, as he had thought before, no matter how powerful Yi Hongyu was, even if she suddenly learned talisman Taoism skills like Yen Sei, she could not survive. But she still jumped down. She was seriously injured by the three giants of Taoism. She walked to the railing, but did not look into the distance. Instead, she calmly walked to the cliff under the starlight and fell into the abyss together with the snowflakes. No matter how he looked at it, she would definitely die. At this moment, a complex array intent was generated in the miasma at the bottom of the abyss. At the same time, another array intent was generated on the cliffs. The two array intents met in the purple starlight. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi did not understand why they subconsciously described the array intent with the word smell when they felt it. Or was it because the array intent really had a smell? It was the smell of pig iron, and there were traces of rust on the iron. It was a little sweet, but there was also a little bitterness in the sweetness. There was also an indescribable sense of excitement. Then the smell turned into the smell of stone. To be more precise, it should be the smell of moss on the stone. There was a little moisture, and there was a hint of the greenness of plants. What was strange was that there was no slippery feeling on the tongue. The moss seemed to have dried up in an instant. What did the smell of pig iron mean? Tough. What did the smell of stones and moss mean? Chu Yuxian and Qinshi were shocked and uneasy. Then they found it difficult to breathe. The reason why they had difficulty breathing was that they felt like there were countless stones in their chests and abdomens. Those stones were angular and extremely uncomfortable. What on earth was this array? They looked back in shock at the beginning of the array intent, the carriage on the opposite side of the pool. They wondered who was sitting in the carriage, and how could it be so powerful? Chapter 1075. The powerful array intent spread along the precipice to the top of Peach Mountain, and then spread along the miasma to the surroundings. The speed of its spread was not fast in people's perception. It was like stones rolling, but in the real world it took shape quickly. The two array intents did not fight, but like two strangers passing by each other. They sat down side by side and merged into one place. They quickly became extremely thick, and although they were invisible and intangible, they seemed to have become real clouds. Shaken by the powerful array intent, the miasma at the bottom of the abyss slowly dispersed, and the starlight turned from purple to white like snow. Finally, they could see the situation on the ground clearly. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi felt that the array intent spread like stones rolling. When they could see the ground clearly, they found that there were stones rolling, and there were many of them. Thousands of stones rolled on the ground beside the pool and spread out, vaguely forming some kind of pattern. Together with the pattern, the clouds floating between the precipice also showed some kind of pattern. Something more amazing happened on the precipice. There were still stubborn wild trees growing between the smooth and seamless stone walls. They had withstood the wind and rain and the majesty of the Taoist array for countless years, but they refused to wither. At this time, being called by the array intent, those wild trees with the strongest vitality began to move between the precipice. Their roots were still deeply rooted in the soil behind the stone walls, but their leaves kept swaying under the starlight. This was a big array, a real big array. This formation was truly huge. The thousands of stones at the bottom of the abyss, the shaking trees between the precipice, the falling gravel, and the pattern of clouds and mist were all part of this big array. If the array was a big talisman, then every stroke of the talisman was moving the mountain and breaking the earth. The heaven and earth were the paper, the stones were the seal, the fog in the abyss was the ink, and the pool beside the carriage was the inkstone. This big array was amazing, and the person who could set it up was even more amazing. It was hard to find such a person in the world today. Even in the long history of cultivation, probably only the great divine priest of light, who founded the Devil's Doctrine, the founder of the Black Ink Garden, and the mighty people who set up the Peach Mountain Array in the divine halls of West Hill could do it. Even if they were resurrected, it would take a long time to set up such a big array. Besides, it was not easy to disturb the grand cultivators on the top of the Peach Mountain during those days. Feeling the powerful array intent, Chinchi was finally no longer as cold as before. He was more confident that Yi Hongyu could survive. He continued to look up at the night sky. The big array intent set up by the person in the carriage seemed to spread slowly. But in fact, it only took a very short time. Yi Hongyu, who jumped down from the divine hall of judgment, was still an inconspicuous black dot on the precipice. There was a shrill whistling sound between the precipice. The figure fell at a high speed without any support. Even though Chinchi knew that something would happen later, he still felt that the scene was too shocking. It was indeed shocking, because there were originally two arrays between the precipice, and the cliff. An intent of the eye-catching array was a wonderful array used by the West Hill Divine Palace to prevent prying. It might not have much effect on Yi Hongyu, who was falling at a high speed. But what about the heart? How could her Tao heart continue to be calm? An invisible array intent formed between the cliffs. The array intent was infused with the cold and murderous intent of Haotian Taoism, as well as the hatred of countless generations of prisoners in the Yu prison. The killing intent was so strong that it made the world tremble. The stone wall trembled, and the clouds outside the wall also began to tremble. The vibration caused by the array intent landed on Yi Hongyu, who was falling at a high speed, in a miraculous way. Vaguely, her figure paused in the night sky. The divine robe of judgment, which had been severely damaged in the previous battle, was shaken into countless shadows. They were not blown out by the mountain wind between the cliffs, but by the shocking array intent. The tremors came from the outside, and landed on her Tao heart. Her sea of consciousness began to surge with countless waves, and her heart began to beat faster. It was as if her sea of consciousness would overflow in the next moment, and her heart would rupture. Back then, Ning Ke was almost killed when he climbed slowly between the cliffs. What about her tonight? Fortunately, Ning Ke was helped by the bright moon that night. The warm and tranquil moonlight helped him survive. Tonight, Yi Hongyu was also helped by the array intent from the bottom of the abyss. The wild trees between the cliffs kept moving back and forth, within a very small distance. The leaves rustled, and the soil at the roots cracked. The stubborn and powerful vitality kept cleansing the resentment from between the cliffs. The thousands of stones at the bottom of the abyss completely activated the array intent in the fog and clouds beside the pool, and spread toward the array that had been passed down for countless years in the divine hall between the cliffs. That array intent was very faint, like a candle flame that could not be blown out. It landed gently on the precipice, and covered the shocking array intent, leaving not a single spot untouched. The stones at the bottom of the Daming Lake had been silent for countless years, but they could isolate the world. The same was true for those stones at the bottom of the abyss. The shocking array on the cliffs was greatly affected. An inconspicuous pebble flew into the air like a sharp arrow, and pierced a hole in the array that covered the eyes. At that moment, Yi Hongyu's figure had just landed in the hole. With a swoosh, a hole appeared in the air outside the cliffs. It could be seen that it was a hole because of the refraction of the starlight, which made the hole look different from the surroundings. Yi Hongyu fell through the hole, and successfully avoided the most powerful killing intent of the heart-shocking array. But it was not enough, because she continued to fall, and because of the power of the earth, she fell faster and faster. Finally, she seemed to become a meteorite. She was very powerful, and a genius of Haotian Taoism. But she was a genius of Haotian Taoism. She had never cultivated, and could not cultivate the skills of the devil's doctrine. So she could not jump down from the sky like Yu Lian and Tang. If she landed on the surface of the abyss like this, she would definitely fall to her death. But obviously, she and the great array master in the horse carriage had made countless preparations. A psyche power fell from the horse carriage into the pool. The pool rippled and countless array intent entered the big array. Thousands of stones under the ground rolled again, and the pattern changed instantly. The miasma beside the pool did not hide anymore. It gradually condensed and finally became an air cushion. The miasma was not air, or rather, it was not ordinary air. There were countless toxins in it, which could be understood as power. The miasma was air with great power. The man turned the miasma at the bottom of the abyss into a cushion, which could withstand a lot of power. The whistling sound came from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the abyss. The strange beasts in the dark forest that made the strange sound were scared and ran away. Chu Yuxian and Qinqi covered their ears in pain. There was another loud bang. A figure fell heavily to the bottom of the abyss. In the sound of crashing, tens of thousands of rotten leaves and green branches were shaken up and thrown into the sky like fireworks. At the same time, several streaks of blood dyed the night sky red. Seeing this, Chu Yuxian and Qinqi turned pale. They did not know whether she could survive or not. They were about to rush over to save her. But suddenly there was a dense whistling sound around them. Dozens of figures rushed over like sharp arrows. They were all black-robed deacons of the Divine Hall of Judgment. Chu Yuxian and Qinqi were slightly surprised that they did not notice these people were there. A moment later, with the sound of footsteps, dozens of black-robed deacons came over, guarding Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu glanced at Chu Yuxian and Qinqi without any expression, and continued to walk over there. Chu Yuxian and Qinqi did not respond to her gaze. They looked away as if they did not dare to look at her, not because of awe, but because of her current appearance. At this time, she was covered with blood. Her robe was badly damaged and piled up randomly on her waist. Half of her body was naked, and blood was still flowing along her perfect curves. It was a cruel beauty, different from Chu Yuxian and Qinqi. The dozens of black-robed deacons around Yi Hongyu looked very normal. They did not show any special expression on their faces, nor did they try to avoid eye contact. Chu Yuxian and Qinqi followed them to the other side of the pool. When they were close to the carriages, they remembered the biggest confusion in their minds. Who on earth was that great array master? The answer was revealed soon, because there were more than a dozen women standing beside the carriages. They stood on the other side of the carriages, so Chu Yuxian and Qinqi did not see them before. Those women were covered with gauze, and the swords hanging on their waists were very strange. They were the famous Xiu swords. Just like their eyebrows and eyes, there was natural softness and unyielding courage in their delicate beauty. They were the female disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom. With a light squeak, the closed door was pushed open. At this time, Yi Hongyu just walked to the pool. A woman walked out of the carriage. She did not have a sword on her waist, but only a blue ribbon. Her black hair under the crown was like a pouring lake, and her royal robe was a little loose, like a cotton dress. She was elegant and graceful, and her aura was calm and pleasant. She wore a pair of unique glasses in the world, but her eyes were still as unfocused as before, showing a kind of clumsy cuteness. She was Emo Shanshan, once the youngest divine talisman master, and now the queen of the Great River Kingdom. Yi Hongyu walked to her, with blood flowing on her naked body. Those female disciples of the Black Ink Garden were a little surprised, and did not dare to look at her. They did not understand why she did not care about it. This attitude was very powerful. It was not bold or dissolute. Yi Hongyu did not care about her body being seen by others, even those filthy things. It was not that she was proud of her beauty and wanted to show her body to the world, but that she did not care about her body at all. She had no awareness of gender. From the moment she sat on the seat of heavenly black jade, she became a superior existence in the world, and had already surpassed the boundaries of men and women, because she was no longer an ordinary human being. That was why she was so calm and indifferent. Those black-robed deacons who were loyal to her also had to learn to be calm and indifferent. Although Chu Yuxian, Qinqi, and the female disciples of the Black Ink Garden felt very uncomfortable, they did not dare to say anything because of her identity and status. They could only avoid looking at her. Emo Shanshan was different. She left the carriage and walked forward. She took off her pure white royal robe and let it dance in the wind. When it fell, it wrapped Yi Hongyu's body. Looking at Yi Hongyu's snow-white cheeks, she frowned and asked worriedly, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly. Emo Shanshan could not get rid of the worry on her face. She was very clear that although she had prepared for it, she would have to pay a great price to escape from the three giants of Haotian Taoism. She confirmed again, "Are you really okay?" Yi Hongyu slightly raised her eyebrows and seemed to be a little hesitant. She said, "What's wrong with me?" After saying this, she walked to the carriage, but did not throw away the royal robe that Emo Shanshan put on her. As soon as she walked into the carriage, she closed her eyes and sat down. Then she began to bleed. Emo Shanshan walked to her and reached out to hold her hand. She was very worried. On her snow-white skin, her slender eyelashes were as calm as willow leaves in the ice. There was not the slightest bit of trembling, but blood kept flowing out of her eyes. Blood also began to flow out of her ears and the corners of her lips. Emo Shanshan knew that the injuries left in her body by the three giants of Haotian Taoism were starting to break out. She could only silently pray that she could survive, at least until she walked out of this abyss. Several carriages began to move slowly from the side of the pool to somewhere. At this time, the bottom of the abyss was shrouded in mist again. Without a trace of starlight, it was naturally difficult to tell the direction. Chu Yuxian and Qinqi did not know where they were going. They were taken into the carriages by the disciples of the Black Ink Garden and walked with them silently. In the end, they could not help but ask each other. It was Zhuo Zhihua, the principal disciple of the Black Ink Garden, who talked with Qinqi. She did not say too many details, but compared with the big tactical array and the picture she saw with her own eyes, the truth of the matter was clear. What happened tonight was all within Yi Hongyu's plan. Whether Ning Ke asked Chu Yuxian and Qinqi to bring those words to the Peach Mountain or not, she had already begun to prepare to betray Taoism. It was not because of the complicated relationship between her and Ning Ke, or because she had lived in Chang'an for a long time. It was because she was Yi Su's sister. Her judgment was actually very similar to Ning Ke's. They both thought that the Abbey Dean would not take the most extreme measures. However, she and Ning Ke were also used to not trusting anyone, including their own judgment. They were used to leaving a way out, or in other words, a way out. She was very clear that if these things really happened, she would have to face a terrible situation. So the way out was the last way, and the way out was the only way out. She had to ensure that it was kept secret and could not be discovered by the Abbey Dean and the hierarch. Moreover, a shameless person like Ning Ke could not know about it. She only trusted those who were worthy of her trust. In today's cultivation world, probably only the eldest brother of the academy, Jun Mo, and a woman who was very different from her, but in some aspects very similar to her. Many days ago, a letter left the Divine Hall of Judgment, crossed the surging river through the most secret channel, and arrived at the capital of the Great River Kingdom, which was full of maple leaves. It was quietly sent to the imperial palace. Emo Shanshan, who had been the ruler of the Great River Kingdom for several years, spent a lot of energy on such a simple letter. She let the people and the divine halls of West Hill think that she was still in the imperial palace, but in fact, she secretly left the Great River Kingdom and came to the divine halls of West Hill. She even lived in the U prison for many days. Chapter 1076. Yi Hongyu was the great divine priest of judgment. She helped Emo Shanshan to live in seclusion in the depths of Peach Mountain, while Emo Shanshan spent these days studying how to break the array in the precipice. In this process, both of them gained a lot. Emo Shanshan's mastery of the Great Blockage Formation was getting more and more terrifying. Yi Hongyu, on the other hand, had learned new Taoism skills by observing the Great Blockage Formation. Tonight in the Divine Hall of Judgment, when facing the hierarch Xiong Chimo's Tianqi, she restrained her breath and turned it into a stone. There was not enough time. Emo Shanshan could not break the great array of clear light in the front yard of Peach Mountain. Yi Hongyu could only choose the back of Peach Mountain as the last escape route. Apart from that, they had prepared many plans for tonight. However, the Abbey Dean's decisiveness was so calm that those better plans were all useless. Emo Shanshan opened this route more than 10 days ago. Last night, she received the news of the Divine Hall of Judgment. She and Yi Hongyu's subordinates started to set up, waited and succeeded. There was a saying in the cultivation world that there were 3 addicts. They were the Tao addict, the calligraphy addict and the flower addict. They were the most talented and beautiful female cultivators. Now the flower addict, Lu Qinjia, was cultivating in the Yueluan kingdom and no longer cared about worldly affairs. Yi Hongyu became the great divine priest of judgment, and Emo Shanshan became the queen of the Great River Kingdom. No one would have thought that these 2 women, who did not have much contact with each other in their cultivation life, would work together without the world knowing. What's more, they had such a tacit understanding. Yi Hongyu sent the letter, which was equivalent to handing over her life to the other party. She was a cruel judge. She did not even trust the academy, but was willing to trust Emo Shanshan. As the queen, Emo Shanshan did not hesitate to leave her country after receiving the letter, and went to the divine halls of West Hill at great risk. Where did their trust come from? In the future, when this legendary story was spread around the world by the new stream, people would often ponder over it, but they could not find an answer. Perhaps only Ning Ke knew the answer to this question, because for many years, he was in the basket under the iron chain, and he was also in front of the White Bone Mountain at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He had seen them fight to the death, and he had seen them go through thick and thin together. He had seen them accompany each other in their youth, and he had seen them chatting like ordinary girls. The fog at the bottom of the abyss was very thick. Although they had all taken the antidote pills specially prepared by the judicial department, they still felt a little dizzy, especially the seemingly handsome horses, which were even more exhausted. Therefore, the carriages moved very slowly. What comforted them was that the people sent by the Divine Hall to confirm the situation would also arrive very slowly. After walking for a long time, a ray of light finally penetrated the fog and fell into the dark forest. But it was unknown whether it was the early morning or the scorching sun in the sky. Emo Shanshan, a divine talisman master with a high state, and the black-robed deacons of the Divine Hall of Judgment, who were best at escaping and killing, were in the team. After Sang Sang and Ning Ke, the abyss finally welcomed the second group of conquerors. The wheels rolled over the rotten leaves. The ground was too soft and undulating from time to time. Sitting in the carriage was like sitting on a boat. Some people would feel comfortable, while others would feel a little dizzy. Emo Shanshan heaved a sigh of relief when Yi Hongyu woke up. She brought the water to her lips and fed it to her. She asked softly, "How do you feel? Do you want to eat something?" "A little dizzy," Yi Hongyu said with a frown. She might be hungry, or she might have lost too much blood, or she might be seasick. But she didn't think it was because apart from dizziness, she also felt a little uncomfortable in her chest and abdomen. The discomfort came from her Taoist heart and her real heart. Her Taoist heart suddenly became a little unstable. Her heart suddenly beat faster, and the blood in her veins rose and fell like a tide. Something would definitely happen if she had a sudden impulse. She lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked into the distance. The forest was full of fog. The sunlight became very soft and fell on her snow-white face. She looked very beautiful. However, the soft sunlight was destined to blur the scenery in the distance. Even if she opened her eyes without blinking and wanted to see further, she couldn't do it. She still looked in that direction quietly. She knew that it was the northeast. She didn't know why, but she knew it was because the Song Kingdom was in the northeast. Yisu was in the northeast. The sunlight became softer and softer. It was as if it was no longer moving in a straight line, but became something like water. The scene became rippling. Yi Hongyu looked at the distorted scene in the soft sunlight and carefully analyzed it. She seemed to see the Jisho Abbey, the mountain path, the thin lad with a wooden sword on his back, the blue sea and his cold face. Finally, she saw the verdant canyon and finally saw his smile. His figure gradually faded away. He was no longer as straight as before, but he became taller and taller. His figure finally disappeared in the sunlight and could no longer be found. At this moment, Yi Hongyu knew that her brother had left this world. She closed her eyes. She didn't fall asleep. She just didn't want to look. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth again. It was not because of internal injuries, but because of heartbreak. Her face became abnormally white, because the soft sunlight had suddenly become cold. After a while, she opened her eyes again. They were calm and extremely bright. There were no stars in the deepest part of them. There was only the brightest star hanging in the silent night sky. The blue sea was fake. It was the satin on Emo Shanshan's waist. Unfortunately, the feeling was real. He had really left. The star in the deepest part of her eyes suddenly twinkled. Two extremely thin streams of blood flowed from the corner of her eyes. She was expressionless. There was no sorrow on her face. She did not cry. She was only bleeding. However, Emo Shanshan could see the infinite sorrow on her face and the vast ocean in her eyes. Her heart ached, and she reached out to hold her hand. She didn't say anything, and just held her hand tightly. They walked out of the abyss and crossed the Green Mountains. They had long been prepared. With the secret cooperation of the Judicial Department, the carriages were not stopped. Even the West Hill Divine Palace did not know of their existence. They walked out of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and came to the surging river. In front of the famous iron chain, Yi Hongyu looked at it for a while. Then the carriages continued south and entered the Great River Kingdom. At this time, the news of Yisu's death had spread all over the world. As the most loyal ally of the Tang Empire, the Great River Kingdom was also in full preparation for war. The absence of the monarch did not affect the judgment of the courtiers. The people on the street all had swords hanging on their waists. They walked among the frost maples with solemn expressions. It really felt like every citizen was a soldier. Along the way, Yi Hongyu constantly issued orders to the priests and deacons who were still loyal to her in the Divine Hall of Judgment to hide. Peach Mountain would inevitably face a bloody purge. She did not know how many of them would survive, but she had to try her best. On the stone steps in front of the palace, Missouri Shanshan said goodbye to Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu would go to the Mogan Mountain Black Ink Garden to recover. At the same time, that place would become the office of the old Divine Hall of Judgment. Although she was still worried about Yi Hongyu's injury, she was the monarch after all. She had a lot of government affairs to deal with. Especially in such a serious situation, she had too much responsibility on her shoulders. She could not stay far away from the power center of the Great River Kingdom. I really want to know what you were thinking when you looked at the river in front of the iron chain. Lu Bai looked at the river and comprehended the sword. He drew the sword on a piece of paper and sent it to me. I want to see how much difference there is between my sword and the river. The difference Yi Hongyu was talking about was not the difference in the state of sword Taoism, but something else. What Lu Bai and my brother did is something I have never done before. I have always been indifferent to the faith. Maybe it is also a kind of piety. Or maybe I need to change something. Emo Shanshan said. The whole world will change. Yi Hongyu knew that she was talking about the new stream. She said, I will pick up the sword and protect his faith. From the moment she said that, the new stream had a new guardian. When Yi Su founded the new stream, the first guardian was the sage of sword Lu Bai, and then Lu Yiqing. The sword Garrett played the most important role. The academy and the new stream were inextricably linked. But neither eldest brother nor Ning Ke could play the role of guardian, because they were non-believers. Yi Hongyu turned to Emo Shanshan and continued, I need more help from you. Emo Shanshan understood what she meant. If the new stream had the support of a secular country, it would definitely develop faster, and its foundation would be more stable. Just like how the academy could not play the role of guardian, the Tang Empire could give the new stream the most direct military support, but they could not let the new stream occupy the spiritual ruling position in the country. The Great River Kingdom did not have this problem. Although the people living here were close to the Tang, they were still believers of Haotian. There was no such thing as the South School of Haotian Taoism. Most importantly, she was the monarch. That's something I naturally have to do. Emo Shanshan pushed up her glasses and looked very cute. Yi Hongyu noticed her cute action and frowned. Ning Ke made it? Emo Shanshan was a little embarrassed and explained, It's for my eyes. It's very useful. As long as you don't mistake it as a token of love. Yi Hongyu mocked. You went to Peach Mountain to help me, because you wanted to help Ning Quebec. Does he know about this? Even if he does, will he care? Emo Shanshan looked at the flower tree in the corner of the imperial city and said, That tree blooms by itself. It doesn't need anyone to look at it. Yi Hongyu sighed. What an idiotic way of saying that. Emo Shanshan smiled and said, He likes to call people idiots. He used to call you an idiot in front of me. Can you not relate everything to that shameless and useless guy? Yi Hongyu said angrily. Most women in the world don't know how to love themselves. There are very few that I respect. You are one of them. But if you can't get rid of that weakness, you can only be an ordinary woman. Emo Shanshan asked curiously, What weakness? Love or Ning Quebec, Yi Hongyu said. If you have desires, just find a man to sleep with. Other so-called feelings are all fake. It's so stupid to indulge in those feelings. It's infuriating. Emo Shanshan said helplessly. It's not the same thing. Even if what you said makes sense, even if love is like honey, and you can have a taste, you shouldn't find that useless Ning Quebec. There are few people as shameless as him, and I've never seen someone as useless as him. Yi Hongyu made the most negative comment on Ning Ke expressionlessly. In the past, she actually admired Ning Quebec. Even though he was indeed shameless, at least in some aspects, what he showed was in line with her aesthetics or philosophy. She even thought that he was the same kind of person as herself. But now her view had changed a lot. She failed to stop the fire in the courtyard in the capital of the Kingdom of Song, because she was actually trapped in the West Hill Divine Palace. And also because she thought that the academy could protect Yisu well. But Ning Ke failed. In her view, his incompetence on this matter was infuriating. I'm leaving. Take care of yourself. Will you always stay in the palace? I am the monarch. Have you ever thought that if you go to Chang'an, you might play a bigger role? But I am the monarch. Even though I was forced to become the monarch, I have to be responsible for the people of the Great River. The war has begun. How can I leave? Yi Hongyu said nothing more. She called Chu Yuxian and Qinqi over and handed them a letter. She said, Only Ning Ke can read it. When they left Chang'an, Chu Yuxian and Qinqi were determined to die. It was with this attitude that they performed well in the West Hill Divine Palace. The beginning of the chaos was their 2 conversations. They gradually left the West Hill and arrived at the Great River Kingdom. Only then did they really believe that they did not need to die. They relaxed a lot. But now they were nervous again, just like when they left Chang'an. Chu Yuxian felt that the letter in his hand was as heavy as a stone. He did not know what was written in the letter, but from Yi Hongyu's expression, he knew that the content was very important. He and Qinqi would not stay in the Great River Kingdom. They would continue to move forward and enter the Yueluan Kingdom through the forest at the bend of the river. Finally, they would return to the Tang. It was a long journey, and they felt a little overwhelmed with such a letter. The carriage to the Tang Empire drove away with the letter. Yi Hongyu was about to get on the carriage when she heard a conversation at the gate of the palace behind them. It was Cat Girl who was talking to Emo Shanshan. Since Haotian is not in the human world, why don't we go to Chang'an? Mo Shanshan did not answer. Yi Hongyu did not know whether it was because she did not have an answer, or because of other reasons. Yi Hongyu looked back at Catgirl and smiled sarcastically. She did not say anything. She stepped into the carriage and ordered her subordinates to drive away. They went out of the capital and arrived at Mogan Mountain at dusk. The horse carriage traveled on the quiet mountain road. The sunset painted the western sky red. Yi Hongyu lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the bloody twilight. She wondered where the divine kingdom was. Were you really there? There is nothing to say. Jiang Yi is in his last month. I will focus on doing a good job. Please encourage me. One last thing that I haven't said for half a year. Please vote for Jiang Yi. Thank you. Chapter 1077. Chen Pippi and the others returned to Chang'an. Ning Ke met them at the city gate, but eldest brother was nowhere to be found. Don't worry, senior brother has to leave. Chen Pippi looked at him and said, You don't need to feel too burdened about this matter. My father's actions are like the will of the natural stream. No one knows where it will fall. It's not your fault. When they reunited again, there was no anger or disappointment, but only comfort. Ning Ke knew that Chen Pippi was such a person, so he was not surprised. However, he felt that his mood became heavier, especially when fourth brother looked at him and sighed. Ning Ke bowed to them, and the disciples of the sword Garrett. Then he said to Chen Pippi, It's my fault after all. Chen Pippi said, Headmaster once said that those who seek benevolence will get benevolence without complaint. That must be how senior brother felt when he left. Those who live, and those who leave have their own gains. In this case, there's nothing wrong with it. Fourth brother also said, If you really think you're wrong, don't make mistakes in the future. Ning Ke turned to look at the numerous caravans on the official road outside the city gate and said, I won't give myself a chance to make mistakes again. People who had been away from home for years returned home, and many left for the frontier. As time passed, the situation on the continent became more and more tense. The Tang Empire faced the most difficult situation and began the most thorough and powerful mobilization. The resources and spirit accumulated for thousands of years were fully displayed at this moment. Whether it was the teachers in the countryside or the girls in the brothels, no one was afraid of the coming war. They only quietly looked forward to it. Countless supplies and fodder were transported from the regular warehouses of various states and counties. Countless cavalrymen left from various military camps and rode to various passes at the border. The Northeast Border Military, which had been newly established for several years, had not recovered to the peak of its strength when Lord Xiahou was leading the army. They also began to prepare to destroy the Yin Kingdom. In Tiang City, there was a hubbub of voices and the neighing of war horses. In the general's mansion, countless battle plans were gradually formed. They were all plans to slaughter Qingjing. The Yulin royal guards went south from Chang and arrived at the plain behind the Verdant Canyon. They joined the Southern Expedition Army, which had been guarding the Verdant Canyon for years, and were ready to attack the hundreds of thousands of South Jin troops and the papal cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill in the south. The most critical and dangerous battlefield was still in the northwest of the empire. The Golden Tribe Royal Court was marching south. A war that would destroy the empire was inevitable. Countless military orders were sent from the North military camp to the border. The 200,000 most elite soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army had gathered. They were ready to fight against the barbarians on the grassland with their blood and lives. However, after losing the Xiangwan Plain for several years, the Tang army was seriously short of war horses. The well-trained old cavalrymen could only fight in the infantry. In the coldest days of winter, Chu Yixian and Qinchi finally returned to Chang'an. They went south from the West Hill to the Great River, passed through the dense forest, and sneaked around the Yueluan Kingdom to return to the Tang territory. They suffered a lot, but fortunately, they did not lose the letter. Ning Ke took the sweaty letter and knew that Chu Yixian had kept the letter close to his body for dozens of days. He raised his eyebrows and wondered what Yi Hongyu wrote in the letter. Why did she take it so seriously? Didn't she know that a verbal letter was relatively safer? Unless what Yi Hongyu wanted to say to him could not be known by others. Not even Chu Yuxian and Chunqi, whom he trusted very much. He crushed the fire seal and tore open the envelope. He took out the thin piece of paper and looked at it. He saw the words she had written. There were very few words on the paper, so he didn't need to look at them for too long. However, those words were very important, so he looked at them for a very long time. Impossible. This was Ning Kei's first reaction after reading Yi Hongyu's inference. After that spring breeze and rain, he never felt her existence again. He looked at the giant ship sailing towards the Divine Kingdom in the sunset. He thought she must have returned to the Divine Kingdom. For him, she was already dead. What if what Yi Hongyu said was right? He might find the answer to many things, such as the Abbey Dean's choice. But he still could not find the deepest and truest reason for his choice. Of course, these things were not important to Ning Quebec. All his attention was swallowed by the literal meaning of the letter. She did not return to the Divine Kingdom, but was still in the human world? Ning Kei knew that it was time for him to leave Chang'an. He kept silent for a long time. He entered the palace and talked with Li Yu for a long night. He told her many things and wrote a letter to Mo Shanshan, but he tore it up in the end. Then he went up to the gate tower. He enjoyed the scenery on the gate tower. When Sang Sang came to the human world, he watched her for a long time in the divine halls of West Hill. Then she left the human world. He thought she had returned to the Divine Kingdom, so he watched her for a long time. He looked at the countless experts, looked at the clouds moving, looked at the great rivers and mountains of the human world, looked at this city and this country. But in reality, he was also searching. He wanted to use his own eyes to find the traces left behind by her. It was early in the morning. He cooked a pot of vegetable porridge by the hut on the city wall and drank it while it was still hot. The falling snowflakes melted when they touched his face. Then he walked to the side of the city wall, faced the human world, and put an arrow on his bow. With the help of the God-stunning array in Chang'an, his primordial 13 arrows could do many incredible things. But they were also limited. Many conditions were needed for them to be effective. For example, in the autumn in front of the imperial palace in Linкong, he tried to kill the drunkard with the eldest brother. But once the drunkard found out, it would not work. Because of these and other reasons, his iron arrow did not appear in the human world for many years after the right to light on the Peach Mountain. Now he pointed his arrow at the human world. Who was he going to shoot? After Yisu's death, Long Qing left the capital of the Kingdom of Song. He led 2,000 papal cavalrymen of the divine halls to the north in the wind and snow. Then the eldest brother left to look for Chen Pipi and the others who had escaped first. Just like in the past years, the drunkard also left with him. To put it nicely, he was like a fallen leaf following the autumn wind. To put it bluntly, he was like a gangrene attached to the bone. The eldest brother found Chen Pipi and the others, and escorted them back to the Tang territory from the divine halls of West Hill. Then he did not follow them. He watched them enter Chang'an and then left first. No one knew where he went. If the drunkard had entered the distanceless state at the same time, he might have been able to catch up with the eldest brother, just like before. But somehow, his reaction was a little slower. His feet were a little sluggish on the cold snow as if they were frozen. Then he lost track of the drunkard. Because the drunkard did not want to chase after them, he followed them all the way. He had a lot of time to think, and he was getting closer to the truth. He guessed the reason why Li Manman left. So his reaction was a little slower, and his figure became more desolate. He turned around and walked to the east. His footsteps left clear footprints on the snow. There was hot air in those footprints. It was the flowing sweat. He sweated a lot because of fear and the truth. The eldest brother said in the capital of the Kingdom of Song that he would regret it. Yes, he began to regret it. The small town was in the east of the Tang Empire. He walked very slowly on the snow and did not return to the small town until the next day. He did not go home, but went to the only calligraphy and painting shop in the neighboring town and asked Chow Xiaoshu to make a pot of good tea. After all, tea was not as good as wine. The drunkard held the small porcelain cup with 2 fingers and looked at the yellow tea in the cup. He felt the slight astringency between his lips and teeth, and thought that at least the astringent tea could be drunk, but the astringent wine could not be drunk. Qiao Shaoshu sat opposite the tea table with a calm expression. He picked up the teacups and sent them to the 4 corners of heaven and earth. He washed the tea with tea and boiled the tea with the sea. A pinch of old tea mixed with the steaming new water in the iron kettle created a wonderful tea flavor. The 2 did not speak, but just drank the tea quietly. The drunkard liked this feeling very much. He felt that Qiao Shaoshu was qualified to drink tea with him. Unfortunately, he was just an ordinary person, otherwise he would have invited him to drink the wine in his pot. The 2 waiters who were said to be the boss's relatives were still in the shop. But as time went by, the 2 fierce teenagers in Chang and had now become young men. They looked much calmer. Zhang San and Li Si were playing chess black and white. They were very focused and did not notice the drunkard's gaze at all. They were frowning and thinking hard, just like those legendary masters in the dark, such as those in the Lank Temple, or the pair in the back of the mountain of the academy. They had also played chess in front of the drunkard before. They were very nervous at that time. They were the only 3rd-generation disciples of the academy besides Tang Xiaotang. If everything went well, they would become the next generation of mountain monsters like Junemo or Yu Lian in many years. If the drunkard knew about this, they would die thoroughly. No matter how powerful their teacher was, he could not save them. The dead could not be brought back to life. Not even Li Man and Junemo. In the drunkard's eyes, Zhang San and Li Si were terrible at chess. Of course, he did not mean that they were terrible, but he set his sights too high. People who had lived for tens of thousands of years were easily bored. Naturally, they would try all kinds of interesting things such as games. The drunkard and the butcher had played those human games over and over again. Besides, as a grand cultivator, he was naturally very intelligent. One could imagine his level. Even if he did not add his talent to chess, no one could beat him on the chessboard, except for a few people in the back of the mountain of the academy and the Lank Temple. If a high-level person watched a low-level person play chess, it would all be a bad move. After watching for a while, the drunkard felt bored. Coincidentally, the 5th brew of tea had been finished, and the remaining tea was tasteless. There was no need to make fresh tea. He felt much calmer. He stood up and teased Zhang San and Li Si, and told Qiao Shaoshu about the recent news of the county school. Then he walked out of the shop. He still did not go back to the house, nor did he go to the tavern. Instead, he went to the only butcher shop in the town. In fact, the tavern was also the only one. Therefore, many things in this town were the only ones. Perhaps this was what he and the butcher wanted. It was dark in the butcher shop, and there was a foul smell everywhere. It was the smell of blood, meat, organs, feces and urine mixed together. The drunkard frowned slightly and tried to calm down his sense of smell. Then he found a cleaner place and sat down. The butcher was removing the hair from the pig trotters. A dozen white and fat pig trotters were neatly stacked on the chopping board and were being burned by the fire in his hands. With a slight sizzling sound, a faint burnt smell gradually spread, and the surface of the pig trotters became slightly yellow. The drunkard looked at the scene and shook his head. He took down the flagon from his waist and began to drink. He knew very well why the butcher refused to give up this business or hobby, but he really had no interest in it. After removing the hair from the pig trotters, it was time to cut them open. The butcher picked up the greasy kitchen knife and was about to cut it, but his arm suddenly became stiff. Because he sensed the drunkard's strangeness, because the drunkard spoke too little today. The butcher turned around and looked at him. After a while he asked, "What's wrong?" He and the drunkard had lived in this town for many years. Earlier, they had lived in another town. They knew each other very well, and it was hard not to know each other. For many years, they just hid and enjoyed the fun that they had enjoyed countless times, and had become boring. It was not until these years that they returned to the human world. To be more precise, it was the drunkard who returned to the human world, because he was faster. The butcher was still the same as before, slaughtering pigs and sheep in the butcher shop, and eating pig trotters and sheep heads every day. But if there was something that the drunkard could not solve, he would naturally put the butcher's knife on his waist, walk out of the butcher shop, and start killing. He knew what the drunkard was doing recently, to keep an eye on the first disciple of the headmaster of academy, and then he went to the capital of the kingdom of Song. He also knew that Yisu was already dead. When he sensed the divine light by the East Sea, he was also moved by the sacred meaning hidden in it. The drunkard did not directly answer his question, but continued to drink, like a whale swallowing the sea. He drank with the state of immeasurable, and did not put down the flagon for a long time. Until an hour later, when the last drop of wine dripped from the flagon, it was finally empty. Except for the time when Sang Sang drank it all, the flagon had never really been empty. But today it was empty. The drunkard drank all the wine in the flagon. The butcher's expression became extremely serious. He had not seen the drunkard so nervous for many years. The last time was when Haoyin came to the human world, and came to the small town. And the second time was when the old yellow bull dragged a broken cart into the town. The drunkard put down the flagon, and looked up at him. With this movement, all the wine that was poured into his stomach turned into sweat, and overflowed from the tens of thousands of pores on the surface of his body. In the sound of splashing, his body became the source of a waterfall. Countless streams of water gushed out and flowed everywhere, instantly washing all the bones, minced meat and blood on the butcher's shop floor. His body was like a wine bag, which was now emptied. After the water washed the floor, it was blown away by the cold wind outside the butcher's shop. Countless streams of airflow blew around, making the signboard of the butcher's shop flutter. It was not peaceful. The butcher looked at his pale cheeks, and held the knife tighter in his hand. Maybe there is something I did wrong. The drunkard looked at him and murmured. Li Man said I would regret it. Now that I think about it, I do regret it. I don't know if it can be redeemed. The butcher slightly frowned, put the knife on his waist and walked in front of him. He said condescendingly, Yisu's death is a good thing. The drunkard said, now it seems that both the Academy and Taoism want to weaken Haoyin. So Yisu's death is not necessarily a good thing. The butcher asked, what do you mean? I didn't understand it at first, until I saw Li Man passing by Chang, and without entering. Then I thought of a possibility. A touch of fear flashed in the drunkard's eyes, and he said, he left Chang'an City and disappeared without a trace. The Chun Mao left Peach Mountain, and no one knows where he went. What do they want to do? What is more important than the entire human world? The butcher was a man of few words, and he looked a little clumsy and sometimes timid, but in fact he never lacked wisdom. He quickly figured out that what was more important than the entire human world was, of course, the divine kingdom. He raised his head and looked through the broken asbestos tiles above the butcher's shop to the dark sky, as if he wanted to see clearly what was going on in the divine kingdom. The headmaster and Haoyin had been fighting there for several years, and no news had been transmitted to the human world. There was no thunder, no rain, no hurricane, and no oracle. However, it was destined to be the most important battle since the birth of this world. It would determine the direction of the human world. As the saying goes, the peach and plum do not speak. The bottom will naturally form its own path. If the mountains do not speak, the autumn wind will naturally avoid it. Well, these metaphors were not appropriate. The butcher and the drunkard could naturally sense that the headmaster did not have any advantage in that battle, and the bright moon was gradually dimming. He sat down in front of the drunkard, picked up the bucket beside him, and began to drink. Only endless clear water could slightly calm the anxiety in his heart. That was the anxiety caused by anxiety. The Abbey Dean and Li Man were both missing. What were they looking for in the human world? What they were looking for was more important than the entire human world, and that was the divine kingdom, or in other words, the great existence that everyone thought had returned to the divine kingdom. Let alone the academy. What would the Abbey Dean do after finding that existence? Everything he did pointed to something bad. The more the butcher thought about it, the more frightened he became. Did someone really dare to kill Haoyin? This thought was like a bone-paring knife grinding on his body, making him itch to the extreme, pain to the extreme, terror to the extreme, and unease to the extreme. After an unknown period of time, he finally put down the bucket of water. The water that had entered his body turned into sweat and flowed out, drenching his oily clothes and leather apron. It dripped to the ground and flowed again, but the water carried a faint smell of blood. Even if Hao Yin really did not return to the divine kingdom, why did he kill her? Why did he dare to kill her? Why did he kill her? As for why, I don't understand. Even if the new stream would weaken her, even if she could not help her in the divine kingdom, because of the headmaster, how could he defeat her? His arrogance makes me uneasy and puzzled. The drunkard said with a pale face. As for why he killed her, I dare not think about it. I think even Buddha would not dare to think like that. Butcher's expression was extremely ugly, and he shouted, "He is actually audacious to the extreme." The drunkard said bitterly, "When was he ever timid? I will spend this month with all of you. Shake hands." Chapter 1078. The butcher was silent. He recalled that years ago, the Abbey Dean sent the drunkard to the West Wilderness to meet the chief monk of Scripture. He was also trying to harm her. She is indeed the most powerful person in Taoism in 1,000 years. The butcher stood up, wiped the water stains off his clothes and sighed. The drunkard looked at him and said, "What should we do? Or rather, what should we choose?" The butcher said, "Don't forget that there are 2 Haotians now. If she did not return to the divine kingdom, and was still in the human world, then there would be one in heaven, and one in the human world. But no one knew which one was the real one. If I follow the wishes of the one in heaven, the chances of success will be very high. But I don't know if the one in heaven will fulfill the agreement between us, and the one in the human world. So we can't let the one in the human world die." The drunkard and the butcher had lived for too long, so they were afraid of death. When the light of Hao Yin shrouded the human world, they hid like rats. When the headmaster found them, they remained silent. When the headmaster ascended to heaven, and the Abbey Dean landed, they remained silent. They never had the courage to rise up. But they still had greed, which was like the combination of countless human instincts. It was so strong and so unwilling. They wanted eternity. Eternity did not belong to the human world, but to the divine kingdom. They got Songsong's promise or gift, so they calmed down and became happy, no longer guarding the boring life of the past tens of thousands of years. Until now, they found that there might be 2 Haotians. This had happened before. When Sang Sang traveled with Ning Ke in the human world, or even earlier, when she lived with Ning Ke in the city of Wei in the Min Mountain, there had always been 2 Haotians. But one of them did not wake up. When she woke up, she and the one in the divine kingdom were inseparable. But the Abbey Dean's recent behavior indicated that the one who did not return to the divine kingdom, and the one who stayed in the divine kingdom, had stepped into different rivers. In that case, was the agreement between them still valid? What did the Hao Yin in the divine kingdom think? Who should they follow? The butcher looked at the drunkard and said seriously, "Fortunately, there are 2 of us. If there are really 2 Haotians, then we can each guard one." The drunkard stood up and said, "That's the only way. Even if we make a wrong choice, we won't lose everything. We can still do something at the last moment." The butcher said, "You go too." The drunkard said, "Of course." The butcher said, "If she hasn't returned to the divine kingdom, and is still in the human world, you must find her before the Abbey Dean and Li Man Man." The drunkard said, "What about you?" The butcher walked back to the chopping board, and threw the trotters into the pot. Looking at the trotters floating in the brine, he said, "I'm going to Peach Mountain. If Haotian Taoism is really acting according to the will of the divine kingdom, then they need my help." Other than the painting and calligraphy shop, the butcher shop, and the wine shop, there was also a gambling house in the town. There were not many people living in the town, and there were very few wealthy families. There were also relatively few lazy gamblers, so the business of the gambling stalls had never been good. However, this did not affect the fact that many men in the town came to report every day, and never got tired of it. Zhang San and Li Si stood in front of the table, looking at the chips and patterns of different sizes, listening to the dealers shout, and smelling the fragrance of cosmetics and alcohol around them. They were very excited. Li Si liked to fool around when he was in Chang, and so he was not a good boy. Zhang San was also very competitive in his hometown. He had broken the heads of many villagers for his mother's sake. Moreover, they had only been in the academy for a short time, so they did not have the chance to receive Li Manman's moral education and Jun Mo's stick education. Therefore, they had no resistance to gambling. Why do we always lose? After losing a few more copper coins, Li Si gritted his teeth and said bitterly, I don't believe it's a technical problem, and it can't be a problem of intelligence. Zhang San reminded him, we played a few rounds with the youngest uncle, but didn't we always lose? The youngest uncle said it's a problem of character. Is our character not good enough? If not, why would the teacher choose us? Are you the prime minister's son? Or am I the princess's brother? Li Si said angrily. He took out a handful of broken silver and stuffed half of it into Zhang San's hand. Then he slammed it on the table. Take it with both hands. I'll bet on the big one. You bet on the small one. Someone will win. Not long after, Zhang San and Li Si left the gambling house sulkily and went back to the shop with their heads down. Qiao Xiaoshu was washing the chess pieces with clean water. Seeing their expressions, he knew they had lost all again. He smiled and asked about the situation. Betting on both sides will definitely lose. People who do this are really stupid, Qiao Xiaoshu said with a smile, but his eyes did not fall on Zhang San and Li Si. Instead, he looked over their shoulders at the butcher's shop on the other side of the street. Zhang San and Li Si looked very calm, no longer cursing like before. It seemed that they did not care about the broken silver they lost in the gambling house at all. To go to the gambling house, they had to pass the butcher's shop. They could hear the people in the butcher's shop talking. Yes, the people in the shop must know. But Zhang Yinzu was just Zhang San, and Li Guangdi was just Li Si. They were just ordinary people, just like their names. Who would care? I'll write a letter. Qiao Xiaoshu walked to the backyard. In the butcher's shop, the butcher and the drunkard sat facing each other in silence amidst the clean water and the faint smell of blood. They had said what they wanted to say, but they could not calm down immediately. All of a sudden, the butcher raised his eyebrows. The knife in his belt whistled through the air. He held it in his hand and held it horizontally in front of his face. His body reacted faster, and he had already squatted behind the chopping board. His expression was extremely serious, which was reflected on the shiny surface of the knife. He felt extreme danger. He had felt the same kind of danger several years ago, during the right to light on the Peach Mountain. Today the danger came again. The drunkard stood up with his long gown fluttering. It seemed that he would disappear in the wind in the next moment. They both felt the threat from Chang'an. The direction the iron arrow was pointing at was moving slowly in the human world, following that person's line of sight. Who was Ning Ke going to shoot? Blood and corpses were everywhere in Yangzhou City. The blood had solidified and turned black. The corpses were covered with snow, but they did not rot immediately. The Fujian River outside the city was also covered with blood. Corpses were floating on the clear water. It was a shocking scene. A sacred sedan was by the river, facing the direction of the verdant canyon. Hengmu Liren sat on the sedan with his legs crossed. His young face was expressionless, but everyone could see his pride from his slightly raised lips and bright eyes. He had led the papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill to kill countless people in Qinghe Prefecture. The beautiful bridges and flowing water had been dyed red by blood. The green trees in the fields were aging rapidly. Magpies were rare, and crows were perched on the branches. He was proud of his achievements and his power. He looked at the verdant canyon that was vaguely visible in the distance, and stretched out his hands toward the sky. When Junimo fought against 10,000 enemies and shocked the world, he was just an insignificant woodcutter in the Revelation Institute. He regretted that he did not make it to the great battle. He was even more regretful that Junimo had lost an arm. So what was the point of winning the battle now? As he thought of this, the regret gradually turned into pride. All the emotions in Hengmu Liren's body eventually turned into pride, as if it was the imprint left by Haotian on him. All of a sudden, he raised his eyebrows and waved his hand. A gust of wind rose from the Fuchin River, carrying with it a faint smell of blood. The heavy gauze curtains in front of the sacred sedan fell off. 1 layer of muslin, 2 layers of muslin, and countless more layers of muslin quickly fell down one after another, covering his figure in the innermost depths. His subordinates beside the carriage and the devout believers in the fields could no longer see his face, nor could they share his glory and pride. Hung Muliran did not like it, but he had to do it. He even had to be vigilant and restrain his aura, so that his Taoist heart could be as peaceful as a dry well. Because if he insisted on his pride, he would be seen by that person. Even if that person could not see him, he would still be worried that he would be noticed. That was why he had to keep a low profile. Was it humility? No, humility was a kind of active virtue, and he was passive and low-key. So this was a kind of humiliation, a complete and utter humiliation. Behind the heavy gauze curtains, Hung Muliran lowered his head. His young face was flushed with anger. He moved his lips and murmured with indescribable hatred, "Come out if you can, come out if you can, come out if you can." After leaving the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Longqing led his subordinates and more than 2,000 papal cavalrymen of the Divine Halls of West Hill to the north. They returned to capital Chung and met up with the papal cavalrymen who had been stationed here for years. The Emperor of Yen was in charge of the state affairs. He trusted his brother's ability and did not have the energy to deal with those trivial matters. His eyes were fixed on the north, on the eastern wilderness where he had risen again, and on the ghost-like peerless powerhouse. Yu Yin's purge of the eastern wilderness was coming to an end. The Divine Halls of West Hill had tried many times to stop her, but to no avail. Instead, they lost more powerhouses. In the end, they could only cover their eyes and pretend that they did not see anything. But he could not pretend that he did not see anything. It was not because the eastern wilderness was the place where he had risen again, and he had feelings for it. It was because the Yen kingdom was to the south of the eastern wilderness. When the desolate man tribe moved south again, the Yen kingdom would be the first to be destroyed. Suddenly, Longqing withdrew his gaze from the grassland and looked in the direction of Chang'an City. Just a moment ago, he felt a wave similar to divine awareness passing through Chungjing City. The divine consciousness was similar to the psyche power. No one in the cultivation world could have such a powerful psyche power. Even Liu Bai, once the most powerful person in the world, could not sweep through the entire human world with his psyche power. Then whose divine consciousness was it? Longqing knew it was Ningke's. When he received Song Song's divine flame, or when he had the entire Chang, and as the source, only Ningke could sense an ocean, and his divine consciousness could sweep through the entire human world. Longqing was silent, but he was not as embarrassed as the butcher. He was calm and did not seem to care. He was not like the drunkard who was ready to use the limitless escape at any time. Because he did not know the limitless escape, and because he was not going to leave, there were only 3 people in the cultivation world who survived Ningke's 13 primordial arrows: the chief preaching monk of Xiankong Temple, Yi Hongyu, and him. Among them, he was the only one who had truly experienced the terror of the iron arrow. The hole in his chest and abdomen was still telling the story of that year. He was too familiar with the iron arrow and knew many things about it. Even with the help of Tianqi and Chang, and Ningke could see everything in the human world. But he still needed someone to help him locate a place in the human world. In other words, he needed someone to push his target to the peak state. These were all calculated by Longqing. So he was not worried, because Mr. First should have left the human world. But he still remained silent. After all, it was the 13 primordial arrows. A gentleman must shoot when he has nothing to fight for. The academy was very particular about shooting. When Ningke was ready to shoot, the entire world was silent. Even the most powerful cultivator, the most confident and narcissistic powerhouse, did not want to be his target. The iron arrow might not be enough to kill someone like the butcher, but no one dared to take the risk. During the Right to Light that year, the powerhouse in the Knowing Destiny state from Qinghe Prefecture died, and so did Elder Cui, who was worshipped by all the clans. They were both killed by an arrow. Ningke looked at the human world. His eyes moved across the vast wilderness mountains, and rivers. The iron arrow moved along with him, and finally landed in the depths of the wilderness in the west. There was nothing there. There was no battle, and he couldn't sense any special light spots in his sea of consciousness. It was too far away, as if he was at the end of the world. Even when his divine sense reached there, it became extremely faint and hard to distinguish. But he still aimed there quietly, because he had to do something. He had to do it when the Abbey Dean disappeared in the snow and wind, and before he left Chang'an. As Long Qing calculated, his iron arrow needed the eldest brother's cooperation. In front of the imperial palace in Lincoln, he and the eldest brother prepared to kill the drunkard in this way. Even though they failed, they still posed a great threat to the drunkard, and caused a great disturbance after that, until Yi Su died in the small courtyard by the East Sea. The 13 primordial arrows in the most powerful state could threaten all the powerhouses. But it needed the entire Chang, and to provide him with power and cooperation. But many people forgot that it was not the eldest brother who cooperated with Ning Ke when he used the iron arrow to kill people from 1,000 miles away. That day in the garden by the Fuchin River, the person who had taken a step forward and announced his name had shocked old Master Cui to the point of releasing his full realm without hesitation. Was Jun Mo. The snow and wind in the wilderness stopped for a few days. Suddenly, it started falling again, and it became more and more violent. The Golden Tribe Royal Court marched south in the snow and wind. Every adult man in the grassland tribes was the best cavalryman. Now the Northern Battlefront Army was fighting against hundreds of thousands of elites. On the western grassland, the snow and wind were equally violent. The Right Royal Court sent out all the best cavalrymen. They were far away from the Central Plains, and had not fought for many years. They did not go south to the Yueluan Kingdom, nor did they take the risk of returning to the east to the horrible quagmire. Instead, they headed for the farther west. The bitter cold weather and the difficult supply of food did not make them hesitate, because they were going to a place called Xiankong Temple. Chapter 1079. First of all, today's chapter has been updated. I've written a lot, 10,000 words. It's the most I've written in a year. The reason for this is naturally because I'm having a good time writing. I can't stop taking medicine, nor can I stop writing. Secondly, I'm very satisfied with today's chapter. When I wrote it, it felt very grand. Thirdly, some readers are asking about the goal of the monthly votes. I really don't want everyone to work hard. I don't want to work hard either. In any case, I just have to work hard and write seriously. But I have to tell the truth, don't talk nonsense, and be humble. Of course, the higher the better. There's no need to be polite about this kind of thing. Anyway, it's only this month. What's the point of going through so much trouble? Just happily ask for it. Finally, I really didn't want to write a separate chapter. But after writing this chapter, I felt that it would be a pity not to do so. Also, I felt that I was thinking too much, and it really didn't seem grand. That kind of me didn't match the great temperament of the ending of the night. Alright, I want to write a separate chapter, because I want the monthly votes. Yes, they all want me to act cute. I poked my chubby cheeks with my fingers and furrowed my brows in thought. What exactly is the act of acting cute? Please vote for the monthly votes. Thank you. Chapter 1080. This was the deepest part of the Prajna Peak. Whether it was the peak, the plateau, or the bottom of the giant sinkhole, the distance was more than 10 miles. There was no difference. The sound on the surface of the mountain couldn't reach here. The sound of the underground river couldn't reach here. There would be no sound here. It was as silent as a tomb. The chief monk looked at the 2 iron arrows in his chest and felt the clear pain. He remembered that he hadn't felt this way for many years. It was fresh and vivid. A self-deprecating emotion appeared on his old face. He had cultivated Buddhism for countless years and reached the peak of the Vajrabodhi. He thought that after the headmaster of the academy ascended to heaven, no one could threaten him anymore. Who would have thought that he would be defeated by 2 disciples of the academy a few years ago, and a few years later? Do you think you can imprison me like this? You won't be able to drink or eat. You won't be able to hear any sound or see any light. You'll be weak and old, starved to death, or driven mad by despair. You might be able to survive, or even break free from these 2 iron arrows, and walk out of the dark cave with unparalleled willpower. But by then, the Buddhist land that you've been protecting will have been destroyed by my iron sword. Junmo's words were not a threat or intimidation. Threats and intimidation had never been his fighting style. He was just stating the facts. It was only because it was a fact that he stated it so calmly, that it was really terrifying. No food or drink, no sound, no light, lonely, isolated from the world. What kind of torture was that? No one had experienced it except Lotus. Even Lotus almost went crazy from the torture. What would happen to the chief monk of scripture in the end? The chief monk put his palms together with difficulty, and looked at Junmo with pity. He said, "Buddha is merciful." He should have felt sorry for his own miserable experience, and felt sad for the years, or even decades of living in hell. But he felt sorry for the other party, and the choice of the academy. If it was someone else, they might reflect on themselves, or even feel ashamed when facing the chief monk's calm and compassionate eyes. But Junmo was different. Buddha is merciful, but the academy is not. Arrogant and disgusting, Junmo said expressionlessly. For countless years, the Buddha land has turned countless living people into white bones and enslaved countless souls. The mountains are built with human bones, and the golden top is painted with human blood. Is this the wonderful nirvana? This is the netherworld. Destroying everything and killing you, and these bald donkeys is the true mercy. After saying this, he didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked out of the cliff cave. He casually flicked his sleeves, and the iron sword broke through the air again, cutting off countless cliff stones and blocking the passage. Wind, rain, light, and air couldn't enter. Ninkei waited on the city wall for 3 days and 3 nights. The entire human world also waited for 3 days and 3 nights. Both the butcher and the small town in Hungmu in Qinghe Prefecture were silent for 3 days and 3 nights, waiting to see where his arrow would go. In the past, it was possible that he would not shoot the iron arrow. The so-called killing weapon was the most threatening when it was not used. Moreover, once it was used, it would break the balance between the 2 sides. So Ninkei did not dare to act rashly. But now it was different. The Abbey Dean left the Peach Mountain and disappeared. The drunkard no longer kept an eye on the academy. The balance in the cultivation world had been broken. More importantly, the human world had sensed Ninkei's anxiety, so he would definitely shoot him today. 2 holes appeared outside the city of Chang'an. They were not tunnels formed by the tearing of space, nor were they real arrow holes. They were just condensed clouds formed by the iron arrows. The 2 condensed clouds extended to the west and disappeared after dozens of miles. It was enough for people to see where the arrows were pointing. 2 perfectly straight lines of clouds appeared in the azure sky. It was just like the rainbow that had appeared in the sky from the ground all those years ago. It was an extremely rare spectacle. Many people in Chang'an brought the old and the young to the street to watch. They discussed excitedly, and guess which powerful enemy Mr. 13 had killed. The debate in the tea house was even more intense. Some said it was Chan Yu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Some said it was the little slave named Ada, a gift from Haotian to the human world. The Tang Empire was the enemy of the whole world since the beginning of the war. People were dying at the border every moment. The people were inevitably depressed and gloomy. Today, the 2 clouds of arrows finally succeeded in invigorating them, and they even felt like celebrating. Ninkei was also looking at the 2 condensed clouds in the sky. The sunlight fell on his face, making him look paler. He could not hide the joy in his eyes. The 2 iron arrows consumed a lot of his energy, but also brought him a lot. Some of the cultivation tools were legendary weapons, such as the chessboard left by Buddha, the Yulan bell, some sacred weapons recorded in the scriptures of Haotian Taoism, and the tomes of arcane that had just begun to show their terrible power in the human world. Of course, the Chang'an city left by the headmaster of the academy should not be forgotten. But most of those weapons were gifts from heaven, or the remains of people like Buddha. Weapons made by cultivators that could show the power of the legendary level were very rare. Now, except for the river and mountain sandbox, made by the former sages of the Academy and the masters of the Black Ink Garden. There were only the primordial 13 arrows. Up to now, Ninkei's iron arrow had already shocked the world. All cultivators knew that it was a terrifying killing weapon, but only the people at the back of the mountain of the Academy truly understood the principle behind it, and why the iron arrow had such unimaginable power. The power of the primordial 13 arrows lay in Ninkei's original whimsical idea, and the incredible practical ability of the people of the Academy. Its strength lay in the fact that it was a talisman arrow. Everyone thought that the primordial 13 arrows were arrows, but they were not. The talisman arrow was not an arrow, but a talisman. Or, the primordial 13 arrows should be regarded as an arrow talisman. Every time the iron arrow shot into the human world, it meant that Ninkei had written a talisman in the human world. The moment the iron arrow left the bowstring, the talisman on the shaft was engraved, but it did not mean that the talisman was finished. On the contrary, it was the first stroke of the real talisman. Only when the iron arrow appeared before the target, the last stroke would fall there, and then Ninkei could say that the talisman was finished. The talisman was a whole, and it was not finished without any stroke. The process of Ninkei shooting the arrow was also a whole. From the moment the iron arrow left the bowstring to hitting the target, it could not be cut. So once the iron arrow was shot, it was powerful and indestructible. The big talisman written by the iron arrow was a whole, and naturally did not need the concept of time and space. So its performance was even more unimaginable than the limitless state. At the same time, because the talisman was interconnected from the beginning to the end, Ninkei did not need to look. He only needed to know where the last stroke should fall, and then he could make the iron arrow fall there. In his sense of perception, when he was writing the talisman, Chang'an City and the distant West Wilderness were essentially connected. The talisman was only finished when the arrow landed on the cliff plateau and appeared in front of the chief preaching monk. Even space could not cut the talisman, nor could it stop the iron arrow. Coupled with the power of Chang'an City, what could the indestructible Buddha body do? When the Academy first developed the primordial 13 arrows, no one really understood the principle behind it. Junimo could not understand it, and neither could Ning Quebec. It was not until a long time later, when he shot Elder Chui to death at the Right to Light, that he vaguely understood it. Today, on the city wall of Chang'an City, he shot 2 arrows toward the western wilderness, and he learned how to write this kind of big talisman. He knew that this was very important to him, even more important than shooting the chief preaching monk, because this was the expectation of his teacher Yen Sei before he died, and it was also what he was destined to do. Of course, as Long Qing had calculated, the primordial 13 arrows needed to be coordinated. He and Junimo were thousands of miles apart, and before the iron arrow appeared, it could not send any information in advance during the process of writing the talisman. He could only wait and hope that second brother could calculate what he wanted, and hope that he could see the chief preaching monk in his sense of perception. Junimo had been fighting in the underground world for several years, but he had only broken through the mountain once and fought with the chief monk of scripture once. Ninkei's expectation seemed to be extravagant or wishful thinking, but he did it anyway. He waited for 3 days and 3 nights. It turned out that Ninkei was right. He and Junimo had no contact with each other, but they naturally had a tacit understanding and knew each other's mind. Just like the iron arrow talisman, no one could cut it off. Ninkei did not know the current situation in Xiankong Temple, and did not know whether the chief preaching monk had been seriously injured by his iron arrow. But he could clearly feel that his 2 arrow talismans were written perfectly, so second brother would definitely do the rest well. His only regret was that the 2 iron arrows had seriously damaged him. Even with his current state, it was difficult for him to carry the power of Chang unto the far west. At this time, the God-stunning array was constantly replenishing his psyche power, but he could not shoot 2 iron arrows as powerful as before in a short period of time. Otherwise, he would have shot all the iron arrows in the quiver until he killed the chief preaching monk. No one knew better than him how important it was to help second brother destroy the Buddha land as soon as possible. Junemo had held up the entire Buddhism sect, the Right King's palace, and the Yueluan kingdom in the West Wilderness. It seemed that he had shouldered a heavy burden for the academy and the Tang Empire. But Ning Ke hoped that he could return to Chang'an. The iron sword should be wielded on a bigger stage, and his iron sword should be used to kill stronger powerhouses, such as the person who was walking toward Peach Mountain. Ning Ke looked away from the two clouds in the sky and turned to the east. Just when everyone thought he would put away the bow, he pulled the bow again and shot an arrow toward the east without any warning. Many people of Chang'an were watching from below the city wall. Because the city wall was too high, they could not see what was happening above, but they could vaguely see Ning Ke's movements. Seeing that he suddenly pulled the bow again, the people below the city wall suddenly exclaimed. Black masses of people surged toward this direction like a tide, wanting to see more clearly. The crowd suddenly became silent. They watched the iron arrow leave the bowstring, and with a light clang, it disappeared in the cold winter wind. Boom! Tens of thousands of people shouted in unison. They were shocked and exclaimed that they had no regrets witnessing this scene with their own eyes. They were also cheering for the master of the academy. A clear and straight cold cloud appeared in the blue sky again, as if the iron arrow had torn a path in the chi of heaven and earth, and even the heaven and earth itself. But in fact, it was the iron arrow that had created a path between heaven and earth, a path that did not belong to heaven and earth. That was the way of connecting the strokes of the talisman arrow. The talisman arrow was the talisman arrow, and Ning Ke's talisman ended in the faraway capital Cheng. It was snowing in capital Cheng of the Yin Kingdom. Pure white snowflakes kept falling from the dark leaden clouds. And in the depths of the clouds, faint cyan lightning flashed from time to time. Some of the lightning even penetrated the clouds and came to the desolate fields along with the falling snow. Thunder in winter, rain and snow in summer, wind and snow were common in this season, but lightning was extremely rare. The scene was extremely strange, as if there was great danger or some kind of power shuttling in it. Long Qing brushed off the snow on his shoulders and looked into the depths of the clouds outside the city. His eyes passed through the falling snowflakes and fell on those high places. He looked a little solemn. Vaguely, he saw a cyan robe fluttering by. But the snow was too thick, and the lightning was too dense. He could not be sure whether what he saw was real or an illusion. Suddenly, a faint shadow passed through the snowstorm in the high sky. Several lightning brushed past the figure and struck down. It looked extremely dangerous, and the scene was extremely shocking. Long Qing was sure that what he saw this time was real, because the figure flew to the top of the city wall of capital Cheng. He even vaguely smelled a burning smell. Eldest brother's cotton-padded clothes were scorched by the bolts of lightning in the clouds. If he had reacted a little slower, he might have already bid farewell to this world. Even so, he looked extremely disheveled. The cotton in the torn cotton-padded clothes and the blood that flowed out were smeared together in a messy manner. It was a very unsightly sight. Long Qing suddenly became serious. The snowflakes around him suddenly swung away. He grabbed the snow with his right hand, and a very dark black peach blossom appeared in front of him to protect him. In the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Mr. First did not attack him, because the drunkard was beside him, and also because he had the tomes of arcane in his hand. At this time, the tomes of arcane were still in his arms. But he was sure that Li Man would attack him. Anyone could understand that Mr. First, who risked his life to escape from the state of limitless, and appeared in capital Cheng, would definitely do something. As Long Qing expected, the eldest brother flew to the top of the city wall, with a seemingly ordinary stick in his hand. He hit Long Qing's head with it. Long Qing did not dare to hesitate. He held the black peach blossom in his right hand, and held the remnant of the arcane tome of the sand in his left hand. He was ready to fight at any time. The seemingly ordinary stick actually had a long history. It was a Buddhist commandment stick made by the headmaster after he founded the academy. It was specially used to beat disobedient students. After the headmaster ascended to heaven, the Buddhist commandment stick was naturally given to the eldest brother. The Buddhist commandment stick had beaten the Abbey Dean to the South Sea for decades. It had also beaten the Yueluan Kingdom king to death in the wilderness in front of the Pamir Mountains. Just like the original use of the stick, it was natural for a teacher to beat a student. How could a student avoid it? Since it could not be avoided, it was usually unavoidable. Longqing knew that he could not avoid the stick, so he could only use the peach blossom to block it. He had the psyche power and essence of thousands of Taoism cultivators in his body. In terms of quantity, he was invincible. But facing Mr. First's stick, he did not dare to underestimate it. He released all his states without hesitation. The stick fell on the peach blossom. The peach blossom naturally withered. The masters and disciples of the academy always liked to mess with the peach blossoms of Taoism. The headmaster cut off all the peach blossoms on the mountain, so there would be successors. Longqing's face became extremely pale, and the scar became very clear. It was not as inconspicuous as it usually was, but looked very ferocious. His arms kept trembling, and his feet were deeply stuck in the city wall. He could not free himself. The black peach blossom dispersed, and countless powders with the substantial qi of heaven and earth blew in all directions. The protruding bricks on the city wall were all blown into powder. Eldest brother did not stop. He disappeared in the snow again, passing through the horrible lightning, and chased after the cyan robe. Longqing looked calm, but there was a deep fear in his eyes. He knew that the cyan robe he saw at the beginning was real. Mr. First was chasing after the Abbey Dean. He saw Longqing on the city wall of Chengjing City, and suddenly came out to hit him with the stick. A casual strike from the staff had forced him to unleash his entire cultivation realm. If Mr. First were to strike him with all his might, would he be able to withstand it? Longqing thought about these questions, but he did not know that there was a more serious problem waiting for him. He did not notice that the wind and snow outside the city wall seemed to have stopped for a moment. An arrow came from Chang'an. An iron arrow appeared in front of Longqing. Longqing's face was extremely pale, but now it became red, as if the blood flowing in his veins had suddenly sped up. His blood began to burn at this moment, and the consciousness left by countless predecessors of Taoism began to help him react in the shortest time possible. Another black peach blossom bloomed in front of his chest. Compared to the previous one, this black peach was much smaller. It was sparkling and translucent, like the most precious of gems. Its petals trembled in the wind, looking extremely pitiful and pitiful. In fact, this seemingly fragile little spade was actually terrifying. The petals were flowing with the infinite aura of quietus, and countless strange auras of the psyche power. The iron arrow shot on the rustling peach blossom. There was a hole in Longqing's chest and abdomen, which was made by Ningke's primordial 13 arrows. This seemingly weak black peach blossom was born from that hole. This black peach blossom was not his natal peach blossom, but his second life. This time, Longqing did not intend to let the iron arrow pierce through him again. The moment the black peach blossom blocked the iron arrow, his hands had already appeared in the air in front of him, tightly holding the shaft of the iron arrow. An unimaginable power came from the dark iron arrow. Longqing's 10 fingers grasped the qi of heaven and earth in the wilderness, but he still could not control it. On the contrary, his hands were instantly torn apart, and blood began to drip down. Just when the first drop of blood was about to leave the shaft, another pair of hands fell on the shaft of the iron arrow. It was a pair of pale, inhuman hands. It was still Longqing's hands. Behind Longqing, a vague outline of a human figure appeared. It was very blurry in the wind and snow, as if it could be blown away at any time. The second pair of hands still could not stop the iron arrow. Longqing roared, and suddenly there were countless figures in the wind and snow behind him. Those figures were very faint, and in the sunlight, it was impossible to see their details. He could only be sure that they were all humans, and they all followed his will. In the roar, those figures collectively reached out their hands, like hungry ghosts in pain looking for food, or like sinners seeking relief. They reached out to the iron arrow. Continue to work hard. Please continue to support me. Chapter 1081. Hundreds of hands fell on the iron arrow. Some of the hands were covered in rotten boils. Some of the hands were as thin as firewood, and most of the hands were only left with bones. The color of the bones was also very gloomy, not white but rather gray. The iron arrow was finally stopped by hundreds of broken hands. But the power of the god's stunning array still fell on Long Qing through the hundreds of hands. He took people's divine sense and souls, and used the hands of hundreds of dead people. Naturally, he had to bear all the power from those hands, whether it was victory or hostility. The power of the iron arrow was like a flood. Because of the final pause, it was released in an instant without any leakage. Long Qing retreated quickly on the city wall. His feet were like plows, cutting countless bricks on the city wall, and leaving 2 deep ravines. The city wall of Chengjing City was 7 miles long. He retreated 7 miles, leaving a ravine of 7 miles on the city wall. Finally, he couldn't stand still. He broke through the arrow mound on the city wall, and fell down heavily in the flying bricks and stones. With a swish, the last remaining power flew away with the iron arrow. No one knew where it went. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace, near the city wall, heard the strange sound, and hurried to help. It took them a lot of effort to pull Long Qing out of the stones and wood on the ground. Long Qing's face was pale like a dead man. He was about to say something, but then he covered his mouth and coughed painfully. In the eyes of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall, he was like a god. They had never seen him like this. The people under the city wall suddenly fell into a dead silence. After a while, Long Qing finally calmed down a little. He looked at the sky where the iron arrow had disappeared, and was deep in thought. There was no fear in his eyes at all. Suddenly, the wind and snow all over the sky stopped, as if Haotian was showing a miracle. At the last moment, the lightning in the clouds became extremely dense, like the reflection of a dying patient, which made people on the ground feel awe. Only Long Qing could see the cotton-padded jacket appeared again, covered with dust above the clouds. Then there was a green robe fluttering in the distance, reflecting the beautiful sunlight, like an immortal. The 2 figures disappeared quickly. The next moment the drunkard appeared. He looked at the direction where the 2 disappeared, and turned to Long Qing with a complicated look, as if he wanted to do something. Long Qing remained calm and slightly bowed to the drunkard. The drunkard was silent for a while, and then disappeared without doing anything. Until then, Long Qing was completely relaxed and his face became pale again. The strange phenomenon in the north of Yin Kingdom today was the aftermath of the chase of the 3 powerhouses of the limitless state. The Abbey Dean, the eldest brother, and the drunkard, especially the first 2, were too close to each other. They formed turbulence in the interlayer of the chi of heaven and earth, which the lightning and of the wind and snow came from. What happened today would be repeated in the human world in the future. It would evolve into many fairy tales and frighten many ordinary people. Long Qing knew that the chase would not stop until one of the 3 found her first, and the disorder of the chi of heaven and earth would stop. For the 3, it was the most important and decisive thing. It would not matter even if the human world became a sea of fire. That was why the drunkard wanted to kill him. But he did not do it. Facing the drunkard's killing intent, Long Qing was very calm. Only in this way could he avoid a head-on fight with the drunkard. He did not think that he could defeat the real legend in the cultivation world. But his calmness also came from his confidence. He knew that his master would be the final winner in this shocking limitless pursuit. The drunkard started late, and the eldest brother could not ignore the joys and sorrows of the human world, like the Abbey Dean and the drunkard. As long as he cared about the human world, he could not really leave. In this limitless pursuit, only a few people knew about it, but it would change the whole history. Just as Long Qing predicted, the eldest brother was at a disadvantage from the beginning. Maybe it was for this reason that he showed up in Chengjing City and hit Long Qing. He wanted to see if he could make the Abbey Dean stop for a moment, and he also wanted to do something to solve some problems for the academy and his younger brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, just like what he sensed in Linkhong City and the capital of the Kingdom of Song, Long Qing was very powerful now. It would be hard to kill him if he did not concentrate. This assassination against Long Qing was not the result of the Academy's plan. It was a spontaneous decision. Ning Kei's arrow was shot because he sensed the anomaly in the east. At that time, His spirit and boldness had been used up in the first 2 arrows. Naturally, it was difficult to kill him, but he still shot. He wanted to see how powerful Longqing was now, because he did not want to miss such an opportunity. Longqing was definitely the one who knew Ning Ke best in this world. Although Ning Ke had never regarded him as the so-called lifelong enemy, he knew a lot about him. Through Yi Hongyu and Cheng Lixue, he knew many things that Longqing had experienced, whether it was the gray eyes cultivation method, betraying Taoism, or sucking the consciousness and cultivation of many powerhouses from the Divine Hall in the Yu prison. So he wanted to test Longqing. Ning Ke felt it was a pity that the iron arrow did not kill Longqing, but he did not care too much. Just like what Junemo said to the chief monk of scripture on the cliff plateau. Except for a few people, the academy never thought that there was no one who could not be killed. If he did not kill him today, he would wait until tomorrow. Thank you, senior brothers. Ning Ke bowed to the west, and then to the east. He dismantled the iron bow and put it into the box. He tidied up his luggage and clothes and walked to the side of the city wall. He remembered that he saw the Empress jump down here many years ago. She was so resolute and happy at that time. Yes, sometimes one should be resolute in doing things, so that one could find happiness. Thinking of this, Ning Ke turned around and bowed to Chang'an again. Then he jumped down from the city wall. A moment later, a dull crash sounded outside the city wall. Gravel flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose. When the dust settled, a big pit appeared on the ground outside the city. Ning Ke's figure had disappeared. This was the coldest winter in 1,000 years. The wind and snow swept across the whole continent, and even the harbor of Yu Kingdom was frozen. In this winter, the West Hill Divine Palace completely suppressed the new stream. The former world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Yi Su, was burned to death in the capital of the Kingdom of Song. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, betrayed Haotian Taoism. The chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple was trapped in the depths of the Prajna Peak, and no one knew when he could get out. Junemo waved the iron sword, and continued his battle in the underground world with tens of thousands of slaves. The dawn was getting closer and closer, and victory was in sight. But at the same time, the elite cavalry of the Right King's Palace and the reinforcements of the White Tower Temple were also approaching. Yu Lien and Tang led the desolate man's tribe in the eastern wilderness for the last time. Ning Ke, who was supposed to guard Chang'an, suddenly left. No one knew where he went. The Abbey Dean Chun Mao, the eldest brother of the academy, and the drunkard were missing. The 3 most powerful cultivators in the limitless state disappeared at the same time. No one found any trace of them in the human world, and no one knew where they went. Even though the whole human world was disturbed by the whereabouts of these powerful cultivators, the human world had to return to the human world, and the war was still going on. The cold winter was finally over, and it was the early spring of the next year. The Tang Empire, besieged by the whole world, faced the war silently and firmly. The war in the Yin Kingdom was in a stalemate. The Tang Empire lacked war horses, and the number of cavalry was much less than in previous years. It was difficult for them to take the risk and attack with full force. The journey of the desolate man's tribe to the south was also greatly hindered. The left king's palace, which was already in decline, had received strong support from the divine halls, especially from Longqing, and more than 2,000 cavalrymen of the divine halls. The Helan city in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains had not been opened, and the elusive Yu Lien did not appear in the golden tent. Maybe it had something to do with these things. To the relief of the Tang Empire, Taoism seemed to be facing more problems. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, was still alive. She kept meeting the devout believers in the Great River Kingdom, which directly caused chaos in Taoism. With the full support of the Great River Kingdom, Yi Hongyu began to support the new stream. She accused hierarch Xiong Chumo and other divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill as shameless traitors who tried to pretend to be the spokesperson of Haotian. After a short period of suppression, the new stream ushered in a period of rapid development. With the support of the Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom, and the secret connivance of the divine halls of judgment, The new stream could be seen everywhere. Yi Su's disciples, and the disciples of the sword Garrett led by Qing Ziqing continued to travel and preach. The once weak flame gradually became bigger. More and more Taoist believers began to worship the saint called Yi Su in their homes. As for whether Yi Su was willing to do so, no one cared. The divine halls of West Hill was enraged. They issued several edicts to erase the sacredness of Yi Hongyu. However, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment had its own rules. The hierarch could not interfere at all. He could only continue to smear her moral character and faith. The next thing to be done was of course to purge the new stream. However, Yi Hongyu had secretly prepared a lot. Those loyal to her had already sneaked into the darkness. The bloody purge became meaningless. At this moment, everyone including the hierarch realized that it was not wise to force Yi Hongyu to betray the new stream. Taoism was thus divided. The divine halls of West Hill felt like it was in a precarious situation. Therefore, the suppression of the new stream was intensified to a frightening extent. There were dead people everywhere. Corpses of the new stream believers were nailed to wooden frames on both sides of the road. With the cawing of crows, blood became the theme of the year in the human world. However, faith was like weeds. The more you cut, the more it would burn. Next year it would grow thicker and thicker. Taoism knew very well what kind of danger was hidden behind the blood. To solve the problem of the new stream, they had to start from the root. That was to kill Yi Hongyu, the Great Tang and the Great River Kingdom. Thousands of cavalrymen of the Divine Halls, and more soldiers of the South Jin Kingdom, were looking at the Great River Kingdom on the other side of the river. Zhao Nanhai was leading them. The middle-aged priest was nowhere to be found. Many people guessed that he had returned to the Jishou Abbey. The war had begun, but it had not yet entered the final stage. Many people were waiting for the result of the battle between the Golden Palace and the northern battlefront army of the Tang Empire. They were waiting for the return of the most powerful cultivators. In the suffocating atmosphere, no one noticed that a new butcher shop had opened in a small town in the South Jin Kingdom. The town was facing the north. There was no need to mention the importance of the battle between the Great Tang and the Golden Palace. But what about those who had left the human world? They left because they had discovered a possibility. The Abbey Dean had confirmed that fact. They wanted to find that person. What would they do when they found that person? Some wanted to kill her, some wanted to save her, and some had no idea what to do at all. There were different kinds of people. But since those people had not returned to the human world, it meant that they had not found her yet. Yes, even if they were the most powerful cultivators in the distanceless state, it was still difficult to find her. There was a snow-capped peak in the far north, far away from the central plains or the human world. To be more precise, it was the furthest from the human world. No matter where one went to the north, he or she would eventually reach the foot of the snow-capped peak and the frozen hot sea. This was the coldest place in the world. Breath would turn into frost, and water droplets would turn into ice. Even the hardest steel could not withstand the freezing for a long time. The buildings by the hot sea were mainly made of wood and animal skins. This used to be the home of the desolate man. After the desolate man moved south, they left behind many shabby houses, which became a paradise for cold-resistant animals, such as snow foxes and long-tailed rats. There was no such thing as early spring under the snow-capped peak. The wind and snow kept howling like before, and thick clouds covered the night sky. It was a starless night, and the bright moon could not be seen. It was extremely dark everywhere, including the snow-capped peak. In a house abandoned by the desolate man, a light was suddenly turned on, which was particularly eye-catching in the dark environment. Strangely, a dozen long-tailed rats squatted at the root of the cedar tree, gnawing on the smelly fruits, but did not dare to approach it, as if there was a creature that they were afraid of living there. The light shone through the window, illuminating the snow-covered path in front of the house. After a while, footsteps were heard, and a woman came over with a heavy bucket. The woman walked slowly with her hands on her waist. She looked a little clumsy, and spilled a lot of water as she walked. Because of the cold, the water that spilled over the edge of the bucket was instantly frozen into the shape of quicksand. Strangely, The water in the bucket was not frozen, and there was not even a thin layer of ice on the surface. It was even steaming, and the dim yellow light was dispersed. What was even more surprising was that the clothes the woman wore were also very thin. On her somewhat old green clothes, the flowers woven with exquisite embroidery had been worn out. However, she didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of cold, and just walked like this. Entering the hut, the woman put the bucket in the corner, and then walked to the table by the window. She looked in a certain direction, and began to stare blankly. She was a little plump, or to be precise, a little fat. Her waist was a little thick, and her movements were a little clumsy. What was puzzling was that her waist was a little too thick. The light fell on her eyebrows and eyes. She still looked very young as she had been in the past 10,000 years. Her expression was still so indifferent. Even when she looked at the snow-capped peak, she gave people a sense of condescension. She was of course Sang Sang, or Haotian. The great beautiful plump, my heroine has finally appeared again. I'm secretly excited and clenched my fists. This feeling is so good. I'm willing to give her all my monthly tickets. All right, I'm willing to play all the shameless things, just to make her and you happy. That's all. Chapter 1082. One day a year ago, there was a spring rain in the human world. Countless people saw the huge ship sailing towards the golden line in the divine light. She stood at the bow of the ship. Her indigo clothes were blown by the spring breeze, and the flowers gradually bloomed. Everyone thought that she had left the human world and returned to the divine kingdom. Who would have thought that she did not go back at all? She hid alone in the coldest northern land. She did not return to the divine kingdom. When she opened her eyes and saw the lush mountains, she knew that she could not go back because there was nothing but light in the divine kingdom. That was Min Mountain. She did not understand why. She used the Buddha's chessboard to live with Ning Ke for 1,000 years. She experienced the joys and sorrows of the human world and cultivated Buddhism for countless years. She finally washed away the 3 poisons in her body and got rid of the power of the human world. Why could she not go back? She stood in Min Mountain and thought silently for many days and nights. Finally, she figured out the reason. She was the choice of human beings, so her destination was the human world. This reason was not necessarily complete, but she did not know it yet. After figuring it out, she did not return to the West Hill Divine Palace. Instead, she chose to walk along the familiar hunting trails in Min Mountain and headed north. She kept walking. She passed by countless hunting villages, Heelan City, Tianchi Mountains, and the ice field. Finally, she came to the cold northern land and the mountain. Her indigo clothes became thinner as she walked. The flowers on her clothes gradually faded. She knew that it was the power of time, and also because she was becoming weaker. Instead of returning to the West Hill Divine Palace, she went to the cold region of the far north, where no one had ever been. It was because she vaguely sensed some danger and wanted to go to a safe place. More importantly, she did not want anyone to see her like this. Her waist was now very thick and very bloated. She was different from her previous tall and fat appearance. She now looked very much like a pregnant woman. She was pregnant, so she did not want to be seen by humans. She was pregnant, and the child in her belly was naturally Ning Ke's. Perhaps because she was pregnant, she was gradually becoming weaker. She was going to become one of those weak, ordinary humans that she used to look down on. God descended to the human world and gradually became a real human. She had experienced this process before. The headmaster had injected the power of the human world into her body and brought her to travel around the world to appreciate the beauty of the human world. Then, she was brought by Ning Ke to travel around the world and experience the world of mortals. During those days, she was gradually becoming a human. In the chessboard, she used Buddha's plan and Ning Ke's intention to cultivate again and purify her divine body. Finally, she succeeded in expelling the power of the human world in her body. She thought that she would win the battle against the headmaster, so she returned to indifference and was about to return to the divine kingdom. Unexpectedly, she was still left behind. She did not return to the divine kingdom. She thought that it was Ninkei's trick. That trick was in her womb, a fetus. Sang Sang caressed her lower abdomen. There was no motherly radiance on her face, not even any emotion. She was just calm and a little unaccustomed. She looked at the snow-capped peak in the distance outside the window and woke up from her memories. She looked at the hot sea covered by snow not far away and thought of another memory. It was here, in the cold world covered by ice and snow, that the headmaster ate peony fish with her and him and immersed themselves in happiness in the hot spring. Then, the headmaster presided over her and Ninkei's wedding and let them consummate their marriage. The headmaster rode the big black horse to the snow sea naked for hundreds of miles. The headmaster was so happy because he knew that she might be pregnant with Ninkei's child, and that it would be difficult for her to return to the divine kingdom. At that time, the headmaster said that Ninkei and her consummate their marriage was so rare that it would definitely be recorded in the history books in the future. Yes, now she understood why. Sang Sang withdrew her gaze and lowered her head in silence. She was forced to stay in the human world twice by the trick of the master and his disciple. Even she did not know what to say. The methods of this pair of master and disciple were always so unexpected. They were despicable and despicable, like a spring breeze and rain. They were silent, but they were world-shaking. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. The clouds were blown away by the wind from the Black Sea on the snow-capped peak. Stars gradually appeared, and then a bright moon appeared in the sky. Sang Sang raised her head to look at the moon. Her right hand left her round belly and reached out to the night sky outside the window. She put her thumb and index finger together and exerted a little force. She wanted to crush the bright moon. She was not willing to do so, but now she could only think about it. That was what she was doing in the divine kingdom. And now she was even afraid of being discovered by the other her in the divine kingdom. Thinking of the faint uneasiness coming from the deepest part of her spiritual world, Sang Sang's face turned a little pale, and she felt a little cold. She walked to the bed and picked up an animal skin to put on, especially covering her belly tightly. Then she flicked her fingers to light the firewood in the fireplace. She wanted to warm herself, which had nothing to do with the fetus in her belly. In fact, although she was getting weaker, she still did not need warmth. No matter how low the temperature was, it did not affect her. But she did it. She no longer thought and behaved according to the cold rules like before. It had nothing to do with the dark world. It was more like she was acting according to some kind of instinct. In short, she was becoming more and more like a human. Just like the oil lamp by the window, she did not need the lamp or the light. Lighting a lamp in such a dark world was meaningless except for exposing herself to danger. But she still did it because the light was really warm. Maybe it was also because the oil lamp used fish oil. There was no smoke, so it would not stain the eyes. Instead, there was a faint smell of oil. Sang Sang suddenly felt a little hungry. She looked out of the window and asked indifferently, "Why did you come back so late?" After the desolate men moved south, there was no one in the snow region. Who was she talking to? Outside the house came the sound of panting. An indigo-haired dog ran over with a frozen peony fish in its mouth. Because the hot sea was frozen, the peony fish had become extremely rare. The remaining ones were hidden in the depths of the sea. It was hard to imagine that an indigo-haired dog could go there to catch fish. Of course, if people knew that the indigo-haired dog was the famous indigo lion in the Buddha's chessboard world, it would be easy to accept. Sang Sang took the peony fish and ignored the indigo-haired dog, who stuck out its tongue and begged for food. She walked to the chopping board and cut the fish with her palm. Then she mixed the dipping sauce and began to eat. Her face was expressionless until she finished the fish. She frowned slightly because she felt that the fish was not as good as before. It had nothing to do with the fish itself or the dipping sauce. Although she used her palm, the fish she cut was definitely better than eldest brother's and Ninkei's. Then why was it not as good as before? Or was it because of the lack of smoke? After eating the fish, she was still not satisfied and even felt hungrier. She said to the indigo-haired dog, "I want to eat meat." The indigo-haired dog widened its eyes and looked particularly innocent and pitiful. Sang Sang narrowed her eyes and looked particularly cold and ruthless. The indigo-haired dog lowered its head and walked to the vast snow sea with its tail between its legs. Sang Sang really wanted to eat meat. Although she did not need to eat, she was no longer as averse to human food as before. Most importantly, the little fellow in her belly was hungry. When she first found out that there was a fetus in her belly, she was shocked and confused, then angry and disgusted. It was not until now that she gradually learned to get used to this existence. She did not think that she had any affection for the fetus, because that was Ninkei's trick. She was just hungry and wanted to eat meat to warm herself up. Yes, that must be it, she said to herself. After a long time, the indigo-haired dog came back dragging a freshly dead snow fox. Sang Sang was very satisfied and rewarded it with a hind leg after roasting the meat. She began to eat the roasted meat. Although it was much worse than the mutton on the grassland that the headmaster took her to eat, she still felt that it tasted good. Although she could not travel 1,000 miles in a single step to the Song Kingdom to have a water feast, and then come back with the peony fish for supper, she was becoming more and more like an ordinary person. But it seemed good. Apart from her hiding by the snow sea, the most important thing to the human world was naturally the war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court. The Golden Tribe invaded the south and looked like they were going to war. However, due to the pressure from Taoism, the Tang Empire could only use the northern battlefront army to resist. The grassland cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court was best at attacking like a raging fire. The Tang army was good at both attacking and defending, especially the northern battlefront general Su Qi, who was known for his defense. He had been operating in the north of the Tang Empire for decades and had already built the border as strong as an iron bucket. If it were in the past, he would not have worried at all. But that was many years ago. Since a few years ago, the Golden Tribe Royal Court suddenly invaded the south and took over 7 villages, including the city of Wei and Kaiping. The Tang Empire's defense line in the north became much weaker. Especially in recent years, the Tang Empire spent a lot of money and labor to build dozens of barracks in the northwest and northwest of the Xiangwan Plain. The Golden Tribe Royal Court showed rare patience and used tens of thousands of slaves to dismantle the barracks one by one. For the Tang army, the most critical problem was the lack of war horses. The northern battlefront army, which used to dominate the north of the continent, could hardly move in formation now. The main force on the battlefield had become a mixed force of infantry and cavalry. It was hard for them to fight against the grassland cavalry, especially more than 10 days ago, when the Qinggu Pass was lost. The most elite cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could even directly threaten the North military camp. At the beginning of the war, the weakness of the Tang army was beyond many people's expectation. Apart from these objective factors, it was also a strategic choice. In the early spring, the Tang army took the initiative to retreat and lengthen the supply line of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. It was strategically correct. But the Tang army did not expect the Golden Tribe Royal Court to be so crazy. They kept marching to the south, as if they did not care about the possibility of running out of food. According to the rules, the grassland cavalry carried enough food and dried meat. If they could not break the northern battlefront army's defense line, they would never be able to return to the grassland. Such a desperate attitude was definitely not a wise military command. But now it seemed to be very effective. The grassland cavalry were like hungry wolves in a desperate situation. Their crazy momentum even overwhelmed the Tang army. Although the war was not going well, the atmosphere in the northern military camp was still normal. After all, the northern battlefront army had been dealing with the Golden Tribe Royal Court for a long time. They were used to the savagery of the grassland barbarians. Of course they would not be scared. Su Qi stood on Xiangliang Mountain on the side of the camp. He looked at the grassland covered by the wind and snow in silence. Snow fell on his lips. His beard that he had just cut in the morning was dyed white, which made him look funny. Several officers followed around him, but they didn't smile. Looking at the great general's slightly trembling back, it was as if they could feel the weight on his shoulders. "We can't retreat anymore." Su Qi was silent for a long time and said this. These words came out from his frozen lips without any emotion. It even gave people a feeling that he didn't expect to say these words. The officers were shocked. They didn't understand why the Northern Battlefront Army would suddenly change their strategy. Although the vanguard was fighting hard and the morale was low, they believed that the well-trained Northern Battlefront Army could definitely hold on for a longer time. Su Chi turned around and reached out to wipe off the snow in his beard. His hunched back straightened again, and he gradually regained his power. Only now did he look like a top martial arts master of the Tang Empire. Looking at the disapproving looks on the officers' faces, he did not explain further. He looked at Hua Ying, who was on standby, and said, "I want you to guard Guha." Hua Ying had just risked his life to come back from the front line last night. His clothes were dirty and old, and he looked embarrassed. But his eyes were still calm. The military order was simple. There was no precondition or backup plan. The general only gave him one choice, which was to guard Guha. Hua Ying did not stay silent like the other officers. He was the one guarding Guha, and it would be his hundreds of soldiers who would die in the bloody battle. Because of the safety of the North military camp? Hua Ying asked. He was not challenging Su Chi's authority, nor was he doubting the validity of the military order. He just hoped that the general could give him a good reason to convince his subordinates, and more importantly himself. Su Chi said indifferently, "After you leave, I will move the general's mansion out of the North military camp and close to you. If you can't guard Guha, it will be my turn." "Why?" At this moment, even the staff officers who had been suppressing their doubts couldn't help but express their objections. "Why?" "Because if we can't guard Guha, Chan Yu's men can pass through Chuanling, bypass my central camp, and enter Hebei County along the southwest side of Min Mountain. And south of Hebei County." Su Chi looked at Hua Ying and the officers and said calmly, 800 miles of plain will be the favorite battlefield of the grassland cavalry. Who can bear the responsibility if the cavalry goes straight to the center? The Tang Empire has a vast territory, but the Northern Battlefront Army has nowhere to retreat, because Chang'an is right behind us. I like the description of the headmaster of Academy, Ning Kei's methods. Su Chi's last sentence was a little early and harsh, but based on aesthetic interests, that sentence is so cool. If you want to write about war, you can't beat yourself if you don't say it at least once. Chapter 1083. I'll tell everyone on behalf of Old Master that he has something to deal with today. He's still outside, so the update will probably be delayed until late at night. Chapter 1084. Hua Ying and the other officers were silent. They knew the general was right. Even though the Northern Battlefront Army was facing a serious situation, the Tang Empire was surrounded by enemies. The Southern Battlefront Army and the Northeast Border Military had their own tasks and could not come to help. Guha was just a small dot on the territory of the Tang Empire. It was more than 2,000 miles away from Chang'an, but it seemed to be the last line of defense before Chang'an. That was why Su Chi decided to defend here. He even sent the general's mansion to the north. It was quiet on the mountain. No one spoke for a long time. Snowflakes were falling slowly. The temperature and the atmosphere became much colder. Even though they knew Su Chi was right, it would cost them a lot to ask the Northern Battlefront Army to give up their original plan and defend here. Could they really defend? They knew better than the ordinary soldiers that the imperial court had done its best. Everyone in the court had worked together. The ordinary people had been living a frugal life to provide the Northern Battlefront Army with food and fodder. Even after a cold winter, they could still eat fresh pork in the barracks. Their armors were not a problem, but the terrain of Guha had been determined. If the Northern Battlefront Army wanted to stop the Golden Tribe Royal Court from advancing, they would have to face more than 100,000 cavalrymen from the grassland. That would be the last thing they wanted to face. The Northern Battlefront Army used to dominate the north of the continent. They were not afraid of entering and leaving the grassland. Even the most ordinary soldiers were good at riding and shooting. They had never been afraid of fighting in the wild. But now they had to avoid fighting in the wild. Because they had a fatal problem. They lacked horses. Huang broke the silence. He walked to Su Qi and knelt down on one knee. He said calmly and firmly, "If we can't defend, we will die." Su Qi looked at his gray sideburns in his face, which had aged rapidly because of the bitter cold weather at the frontier fortress. His heart was heavy, but he did not show it on his face. He said, "You are wrong. Even if you die, you must guard it for me." Huang answered without hesitation, "Yes, sir." Su Qi helped him up and looked at him in silence for a long time. Finally, he could not help but sigh. "Thank you for all these years." Huang smiled and said nothing. Since the war against the Golden Tribe royal court began, he had been guarding the northernmost part of the Tang Empire's territory. As the vanguard, he was responsible for the most important and the heaviest task. Even though he had the only cavalry left in the northern battlefront army, it was still a tough job for him. If not for his high martial arts cultivation and the tight defense of the Tang army, he would have been nearly assassinated by the experts on the grassland several times. But Huang never complained. Even when Su Qi wanted to transfer him back to the North military camp for a rest, he refused very seriously. Everyone in the northern battlefront army knew the reason. Even the nobles in the imperial palace and the military officials in Chang knew the reason. Hua Ying's surname was Hua. She was from the Hua family and Hua Shanyu. Hua Shanyu followed Li Yu in the rebellion, but failed and died on the spot. Those officers who secretly rebelled against the capital from the Gushan commandery were sent to the northern military camp by Ning Ke and exchanged their military achievements for honor. After several years, few of those people were still alive. Because of this incident, the once famous Hua family quickly declined. Now only Huang still held an important position in the army. Therefore, Huang worked very hard. He wanted to fight for the Hua family with his life. He wanted to fight for the glory of the Hua family and be high-spirited. Su Qi said, "Don't work too hard. It's better to be alive." Huang did not answer directly. He said, "We will win." It was the end of spring in the 6th year of Zhengshi of the Tang Empire, and the 3455th year of Daji of West Hill. The vanguard of the northern battlefront army met the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court, about 170 miles south of the city of Wei. They fought for more than 10 days, with some winning and some losing. Then the main force of the northern battlefront army moved north and set up camp around Guha. The two most powerful military forces in the world officially began the competition. They fought for more than 10 days, with some winning and some losing. But Guha was still behind the northern battlefront army camp, and the cavalry of the Golden Tribe did not move south. The two sides took a break and resumed the confrontation. But everyone knew that it was different from the past. This confrontation would not last for more than 10 days or even years. It would only last 1 or 2 days at most before the war resumed. The northern battlefront army had paid a heavy price to keep the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court to the north of Guha. They were seriously short of horses. Even the most experienced soldiers who were good at archery and horsemanship could only use padeos to cover the flank of the formation. They could not fight in the front. The most powerful cavalry of the northern battlefront army could only be used as infantry because they did not have war horses. It was a waste in everyone's eyes. But who could change it? Since the day the divine halls of West Hill forced the Tang Empire to sign the peace treaty, the Xiangwan plain was ceded to them, and the war horses were handed over as trophies. This infuriating and helpless scene was a fact. The morning sun rose from the east. Those with the best eyesight in the army, and Su Qi in the general's mansion, could vaguely see Min Mountain in the blood-red morning glow. Yesterday, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court temporarily retreated to the front line of Kaiping town. They rested and reorganized for the final attack. Facing the determined Tang army and the tricky combination of infantry and cavalry, Chanyu of the Golden Tribe royal court could no longer be satisfied with the partial victory on the battlefield. He was even more anxious because of the passing time. Obviously, the upcoming field battle would be a storm that the northern battlefront army had never faced before. Situilan stood on the meadow, holding the saber on her waist. She looked at the direction of the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. Her dusty face was full of calmness and vigilance. Her slightly squinted eyes were shining colder than a blade. As a disciple of the academy, and a descendant of the old general, she had performed well in the Northern Battlefront Army. She had long become the youngest general, and now she was Hua Ying's assistant. She was loved and respected by the soldiers of the Northern Battlefront Army. The Northern Battlefront Army had been under great pressure for dozens of days, especially in the recent days. They had paid a heavy price. Some military doctors in the camp had not slept for 3 days and nights. Situilan looked calm when she thought of this. She did not let her bodyguards notice anything wrong, but the problem was still there. It was like a heavy stone pressing on her heart. Instead of retreating, the Golden Tribe Royal Court rested and reorganized. The general's order was to defend Guha with all their might. It seemed that this field was destined to become a graveyard for hundreds of thousands of lives. But no one knew who would be qualified to write the epitaph for the dead in the end. She was in a high position in the Northern Battlefront Army. She knew a lot of military information that the ordinary soldiers did not. Yesterday, the reinforcement from the Gushan Commandery tried to sneak attack a troop of the Golden Tribe Royal Court from the foothills of Min Mountain. But they were seen through in advance. The tribe quickly moved closer to the Golden Tribe Royal Court. So the Northern Battlefront Army lost the best chance to disrupt the enemy's base. What else could they do? Situilan stared at the sand table for a long time last night. She compared the knowledge taught by the teachers from the academy and the military ministry with her own experience in the army, but she still could not find a solution. General Su Qi was the only one who could decide the strategy of the Northern Battlefront Army, or further south, the siblings in the Imperial Palace, and the teachers from the academy. But she also wanted to help. Unfortunately, Situilan had many questions in her heart besides the heavy stone. General Su Qi's strategy could not be said to be wrong. Whether it was the retreat at the beginning or the bloody defense at the moment, the former was to trade space for time and exhaust the enemy's army. The latter was because they could not show any signs of defeat and had to use absolute iron and blood to stabilize the Tang Empire's northern border. However, it was obvious that there should be many better, or more flexible, or less desperate ways to deal with the situation. General Su Qi's strategy was to attract all the main forces of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to Guha. If they could win, it would be difficult for the main cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court to escape. In the hundreds of years of war between the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court, the most troublesome thing about the Golden Tribe Royal Court was that they could escape. Even if the Tang army won, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court could quickly retreat to the depths of the grassland, and the Tang army could not destroy their main force. There was a lot of military wisdom in this strategy, but it had to be carried out. Most importantly, the Tang army had to win first, so they could talk about how to destroy the main force of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. How to win this war? Situilan could not figure it out. She did not think General Su Qi could. So she was more and more confused about what the general, or the imperial court was thinking. She was neither a pessimist nor a defeatist. Just like her bodyguards and the Tang soldiers in the camp, she was not afraid of the cavalry of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. But her reason told her that victory was still far away. The Northern Battlefront Army was of high quality, and they were backed by Guha, so they had the advantage. Not to mention the right time and the right people. They should not make her so desperate. But there was still the same problem. No horses. No war horses. The Northern Battlefront Army did not have enough war horses. Situilan walked back to the camp with her bodyguards. Along the way, the soldiers stood up and saluted her. She could clearly tell that although they saluted in the same way, there was a big difference. For example, the new soldiers who had been in the Northern Battlefront Army for less than 2 years looked calmer and a little shy. But the old veterans looked indifferent. As for the look in their eyes, they were sneakily glancing at her. Although it was just a small movement, she could clearly feel it. Those veterans reminded her of someone she had not seen for a long time. It was her former classmate, and later the so-called teacher, the guy who had stood on the top of the world. Chapter 1085. That guy also looked tired. He used to peek at her like this, whether it was in the wetland of the academy, in the house of red sleeves, or in the north of Yin Kingdom. He always glanced at her chest, waist, buttocks, and legs. He thought she didn't know, but she knew everything. She was just too shy to say it. Of course, Situ Elon thought of Ning Quebec. She didn't suddenly recall her youth when she was in a desperate situation. She just wanted to gain some strength from it. The veterans in the camp were very similar to Ning Quebec. They were all unimaginably tough, and could do things that most people couldn't imagine. But what made her sad was that deep in the indifferent expressions of those old soldiers, there was still unwillingness. Especially when they saw the war horses led by her bodyguards, the envy and unhappiness in their eyes could be clearly seen. Yes, it was still the same question. Situ Elon lowered her head, and thought about why the imperial court agreed to cede Xiangwan Plain to the Golden Tribe Royal Court when they negotiated with the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did they agree to compensate the Golden Tribe and the Yin Kingdom with war horses? Yes, the situation was really serious at that time. But didn't the imperial court know that if they agreed to the conditions, they would be committing suicide? That black news had been falling slowly in the air for several years. Now it finally fell on the grassland, in front of every soldier of the Northern Battlefront Army. Even the people of Chang'an knew it. So did the ministers in the imperial court. Princely Peiyan even hanged himself because of it. Situ Elon knew it was the Academy's decision. More precisely, it was Ning Kei's decision. Why did the Academy agree? Situ Elon walked to the tent and looked at the man and the woman by the table. She felt a bit weird. She was a student of the Academy, and these two could really represent the Academy. Thinking of her previous dissatisfaction, she didn't know what to say. Muyu's favorite light yellow dress had long been replaced by practical cotton-padded clothes. Sixth brother was still naked from the waist up like he did at the back of the mountain of the Academy, wearing only a leather jacket. Situ Elon could not say anything bad to the two Academy teachers, because these days, they were supposed to be sitting on the clouds like immortals, but they were living and fighting like ordinary soldiers. The situation of the war had changed. Cultivators had been assassinating the enemy's generals all the time. If Muyu had not organized the array tactical masters to set up several exquisite arrays in the camp, and if Mr. Six had not waved his hammer, many Tang generals would have been assassinated by the Golden Tribe Royal Court at all costs. As for Mr. Six's sleepless nights repairing the weapons of the Tang army, it was not worth mentioning. Situ Elon found that one person was missing and asked, "Where did Mr. Fourth go?" Mr. Fourth of the Academy, Fan Yu, was now the brains of the vanguard of the Northern Battlefront Army. General Huang trusted him very much. He was the one who planned everything. Muyi took out a towel from the basin and wrung it dry. Then she walked to her and wiped the dust off her face. She said with pity, "I don't care where he went. You are such a beautiful girl. Even if you can't dress up, you should at least make yourself clean." Situ Elon was not in the mood to care about her own appearance. She smiled bitterly. When she thought of the battle array of the Golden Tribe Royal Court on the meadow, she became serious again. She asked Muyu in a low voice, "When will Mr. Third take action? When will the Enlightenment Doctrine and the Desolate Man arrive?" The current situation was extremely favorable to the Northern Battlefront Army. She could not think of any change. However, General Su Qi was still calm. She naturally thought that the Academy must have arranged many powerful fighters. Muyu had been setting up arrays for many days and nights. She looked exhausted. Hearing Situ Elon's words, she said after a moment of silence, "I don't know where senior sister is either." Hearing this, Situ Elon was disappointed and confused. According to the original plan, she should have conquered the eastern wilderness in early spring and come here. She should have taken action. Maybe it is not the right time yet. There must be a reason. Muyu put her arms around her and sat down. She asked her to finish her breakfast and comforted her. Everything that went against common sense must have its own reasons. For the army, common sense was the objective judgment of victory and the subsequent calm response. Huang stood outside the tent. He looked at the bloody morning glow and the countless tents of the Golden Tribe royal court in the distance. He always felt that the general's response was unreasonable. What was the reason? A staff officer handed him a pair of binoculars. He took the binoculars and looked in the direction of the Golden Tribe royal court. Then he looked to the east, dozens of miles away. He observed in silence for a long time. The binoculars were made by the academy and brought to the front line by Mr. Sixth. Now almost all the important generals in the Northern Battlefront Army had one. Once they used it, they would treat it like a treasure and would never let it go. Huang sighed. With the help of the academy, he could clearly see the movements of the Golden Tribe royal court. But the enemy did not notice it at all. If it were in the past, the Northern Battlefront Army would definitely win the war. Especially now, Chanyu had taken the risk and led his entire tribe to attack the south. He wanted to fight a war that could destroy the country. He did not care about the retreat at all. His troop formation was unparalleled. But in the eyes of the experienced Tang generals, it was also full of loopholes. As long as they could send out a strong cavalry, they could definitely make the enemy suffer. If give me 10,000, no, even 8,000. Huang put down the binoculars and looked to the north. He said in a trembling voice, "Give me 8,000 good horses, and I can defend Guha. I can even drive them to the north of the city of Wei." Chanyu's choice was too confident. In Hua Ying's eyes, it was a great opportunity. That was why his voice was trembling. It was an unbearable pain to lose such an opportunity. Su Qi firmly believed that the Northern Battlefront Army could defeat the cavalry of the Golden Tribe royal court in the field. Huang was confused. He would not question the military order, but he painfully wished that he could have 10,000 more horses. But that would not happen. Even if Hao Yan came back to the human world, there was no way he could make 10,000 well-trained horses for the Tang in such a short period of time. The Golden Tribe royal court dared to attack the south. Chanyu was so confident and even arrogant in his troop formation. He was not afraid of the final battle in the field tomorrow. Wasn't it because he knew that the Tang had no horses? Many soldiers of the Tang army imagined that the imperial court had secretly raised a lot of horses to give the enemy the heaviest and most unexpected blow in the final battle. But that was just a fantasy. Chanyu would not think so. Raising horses required a lot of fodder, stables, manpower, and resources. It was impossible for such a large number of war horses to be secretly raised in the provinces of the Tang Empire. How could they hide from the omnipresent eyes of Taoism? Even if they could, what was the use of those untrained horses that had never been on the battlefield? Horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time. Situ Ilan was thinking, the cavalrymen were thinking, Huang was thinking, and everyone was thinking. They were all desperately and angrily screaming in their hearts. Why did they not have horses? They did not need war horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time. Even an ordinary horse would do. As long as it could move the cavalrymen, it did not matter if it was a handsome stallion, a graceful mare, a naughty colt, a Hatao horse, a river pony, or a grassland horse. Any horse would do, as long as it was a horse. Because without horses, the Tang Empire would not survive. In the Northern Battlefront Army, only General Su Qi still had the last bit of confidence. Yu Lian did not show up in the grassland. The National Master and the dozen high priests of the Golden Tribe Royal Court did not come to the front. They were in the rear, heavily protected by the grassland cavalrymen. Su Qi's confidence did not come from Yu Lian or the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine Tang. He had already received information from Helan City that the desolate man's tribe in the eastern wilderness was pinned down by the cavalrymen of the Divine Halls from the Yin Kingdom. They could not come to help in a short time. This was of course very bad news. Fortunately, he received another piece of news from the Academy dozens of days ago, which brought him the long-awaited spring breeze. Countless wagons had already left the town where the northern military camp was located. They were transported to the back of Guha and hidden in the supply camp of the main force of the Northern Battlefront Army. To keep it a secret, Even Huang did not know about it. The dawn had not come yet, and the moon had already fallen asleep. The sky was turning white in the east, and there were still some dim stars in the west. The people on the grassland had already woken up. In the countless tents of the Golden Tribe royal court, children's laughter and women's worried whispers could be heard everywhere. Of course, most of the noise was the sound of scimitars and leather armors, the restless neighing of war horses, and the crackling of hay. According to the tradition of the grassland cavalrymen, no one dared to bring their families with them. But this time, the Golden Tribe royal court was invading the south, and all the men brought their wives, children, and slaves. Chan Yu and the nobles were glad that they had made a lot of preparations in advance, so they did not become a burden to the warriors, but became the best motivation for them to fight the Tangs bravely. The warriors of the Golden Tribe had already lined up. They looked solemn and determined. The cavalrymen of different tribes were also putting on their leather armors and preparing their weapons with the help of their slaves or family members. It was the darkest time before dawn, but the cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe did not want to take advantage of the darkness to attack the Tang army in the south, because the darkness was unfair to everyone. The cavalrymen were too fast, so they needed a good vision. Now that the Golden Tribe had the absolute advantage, they would not take such a risk. The reason why they started to line up so early was because of the need of the war, and also because of the fighting experience imprinted in the blood of all the grassland cavalrymen. Today would be a long and arduous battle. Humans could persevere with their spiritual will, but the war horses could not. Therefore, before entering the battlefield, they had to feed the war horses well, with the best fodder, and even some expensive grains and beans, with enough water and salt. All of these preparations had to be completed 4 hours before the battle officially began. For hours later, the cavalry of the Golden Tribe would sweep over and devour everything in sight. There are some problems with the schedule these 2 days, so it is very likely that the update will not be completed tomorrow. If not, I will report to you, and everything will be back to normal the day after tomorrow. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.